Hello and welcome to SDA Q&A. I'm Peter Dixon, your host for today. Cheers, everybody. I hope you've got your SDA mugs and you're having a nice warm brew, hot brew. My very special guest today is Brian S. Newman. Great to have you on the show, Brian.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I've been looking forward to this for a long time. I remember a friend of mine, Cheryl Ann Hill, loaned me your book. She said, "Have you read this book? It's amazing. It's called The White Elephant by Brian Newman, and I think you'll enjoy it." And she loaned me her copy because I had trouble buying yours online, which I think now is pretty easy to do, but this must have been at least a year ago. And I think it was so popular, they were just kind of selling out on Amazon. And so anyway, and when there's less copies left, the price goes up. And I remember there was one there for about $200, and I thought, well, I'll wait till it comes down a little bit. And I think they're down up to $20 now or something. But anyway, she loaned me her copy, and I read it, and I loved it. And I loved the parallels between our kind of love for music and playing blues and Americana, and I've since gotten to really enjoy your music, which you can find easily on YouTube and on your YouTube channel. So it's been a long time in the works, but here we are, and it's great to have you on the show today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Look, can we start by just finding out a little bit about who you are? I know in the back, in your previous life, when you were a Seventh-day Adventist, you were also an evangelist for Amazing Discoveries. And I've watched some videos of you there where you are speaking very convincingly in support of Ellen White and the traditional Adventist views. And you've come on quite a journey since then, right up to your writing of the book, The White Elephant, which I'll just quickly bring up onto the screen. That's what it looks like there, everyone. On, I don't think I can zoom that in.
I can hold up. I can hold up a
copy. That would be terrific. That would be even better. So I'll just take that off the screen. But that's available on Amazon. I notice one there. Yeah, great.
So that's
it's got the mirror image thing going on there. But now it's a thick book. Was it? I remember reading somewhere where you said there maybe were 2 volumes and you've put it into one, or what's?
That's correct. Originally, I did the book through a publisher here in America, and the publisher actually, well, they went bankrupt, and and at that point in time, the book was in 2 volumes, Volume 1 and Volume 2. But there were some things which I wanted, because we kind of rushed it into printing, and there were some things I wanted to take out. There were some things I wanted to add as well. And so when that happened with the publisher, I condensed the book and took out some of the things I did. And I mean, it's still a lengthy book.
Yeah.
So, but yes, so I've condensed it. It's also a very long read when you have everything, that I wanted to say in that long version. And so that is what now is available on. In fact, I've noticed when I've gone on Amazon, I think there are still some. I don't know how this happens, but you put a book out there and people get hold of it from some other company online, and they're selling your books, and you don't know who they are.
Yes.
But maybe they are selling a lot of books. I don't know, because we just can't seem to figure it out.
Yes.
So they're selling some of the older versions with the 2 volumes.
Right.
But on Amazon, if one goes under my name onto Amazon, I published my own book through Kindle afterwards.
Oh.
There you will get a condensed version, and it is definitely not $200. So
the one I'm showing here today is in Australian dollars, and it's I think $30. Okay, so people can buy a Kindle version of it.
Yeah, we published it on Kindle books, so you should be able to get there, and it is definitely. It sounds in the ballpark if you transfer the US dollars to Australian. That sounds about
right. Yeah,
but I've made it as cheap as possible. So in fact, that may even be a lot less, come to think of it, because I wanted people to just get the book and just to cover and maybe make a little bit on the book. So it's it's
a funny system that Amazon has and Kindle has with a lot of the pricing. But I've been really plugging the book this week, and several people have said they've found it for $15 to $20. So that's a good
That's
sign.
like it. Yeah.
Yeah. If you can, while we're chatting at some point, if you can find the Kindle version link and maybe send it to me via email. If we have a bit of a break in the middle, so maybe do that, and then I can kind of share that as well.
Yeah, so I've got my wife is with me, Cami. So she's looking up online, and she'll get the link for us.
Great. And if she emails it to me, because my messenger's not working, I can make that available.
Okay, yeah, be perfect.
So look, it's, as I said, it's great to have you here. That book is incredible. I learned lots of new things. It's a recent book, isn't it? 2020 from memory.
The original publication, that's when I did the condensed version that is now. We originally released the first version, which was the A and B, in 2016, towards, I think, September, somewhere around there. That's where the publishing company, and then because everything went crazy with the publishing company, we ended up doing it this way. And then I finally released it in 2020.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Well, it's a great read, and I highly recommend those watching go and buy a copy. Now, tell us a little bit about Brian S. Newman. Tell us your Adventist journey. Give it all, and lay it on the table.
Yeah, my family, just like you, mine are fourth generation Adventists. Although it's the late 1800s, my great grandparents became Seventh-day Adventists in South Africa, and from then on, generation after generation, my family were church workers, missionaries, fully, into supporting the Adventist church. And my grandmother was a teacher for the Adventist church. So pretty much most of my family were church workers all the way through.
Yeah.
So when I was born, actually born in Malawi, which is a country north of South Africa. And my parents were missionaries there. So I was born while they were on the mission station. I was a mission station baby. So, yeah. So after that, we moved back down to South Africa, and I pretty much grew up in the Adventist institutions. I was raised and studied at Adventist schools. Heidelberg College was where I went to school. And then pretty much into from my very earliest years, I was always into music. So by the time I was 10 years old, I was playing guitar and started developing dreams of becoming a musician and doing things like that. And in my mid to late teens, shortly after being in the military, I joined a band which became popular in South Africa, and my music career began. So I was eventually signed to a music company. We moved over with my producer and manager. He was the same person, to Germany. That was in the mid 80s, and I was signed to Polydor Records in Germany.
Wow.
My music career is kind of a weird one because although I was signed that year, which was 1987, I'm kind of giving away my age here, but anyway, 1987, when I was in Germany, the band that I was with, we were called The Respect. We were all really the whole rock and roll lifestyle music scene. That was my life, during that period of time. And not everything was good at that time. So
and that was in Germany, was it?
Yeah, I was.
You literally relocated to Germany.
Yes,
a great time for great time for rock music and blues in Germany at that time. It was really going off in the late 80s and into the 90s.
Exactly. Yes, and of course, Polydor Records, Deutsche Grammophon, it's part of the same company, is in Hamburg in Germany. So we recorded in great studios. At the end of that year, we were like musicians from South Africa, had some sort of notoriety in South Africa, but we happened to end up on a compilation album, and which was a kind of a Christmas album of that year with very famous musicians like Elton John and Janet Jackson and Level 42, who were big names, during that era. Of course, some are. And we traveled around playing, and I came back to South Africa 2 years later, continued my career there. And by then I had probably developed my skill as a guitarist a lot more. I became very well known as a guitarist in my home country. So then by 1992, I'd had, maybe I should backtrack a bit, I'd had a drug overdose when I was in Europe. One of the reasons why I ended up coming back to South Africa, I nearly died of a drug overdose in Hamburg, in Germany. As I said, I got into more than just the music.
Yeah.
So in any case, and there were things I felt a need in myself, and the Spirit of the Lord, of course, was talking to me, but I knew I needed something in my life that was more than just, the rock and roll lifestyle. And there was this need to find something more meaningful and something spiritual. And I'd always been interested. This is kind of the part of the irony. Even though I grew up getting into the music industry, I always was very interested in prophecy and things like that. And I remember being in Europe, my mother used to send me books on Adventist interpretations of Bible prophecy and things, and I would read them. So always in the back of my mind, there was this need that I needed to, give my life to the Lord. It wasn't something which happened overnight. It kind of developed over a while. And by 1992, I decided that I'd had enough. In fact, I'd had another bad experience with drugs as well. And I gave my life to the Lord, got baptized. And as it would be at that time, I went back to my roots, my Seventh-day Adventist roots. So I got baptized into the Adventist church, and within a very short space of time, I was doing ministry. And part of the reason for that was because I was fairly well known, and people wanted to hear what I had to say about music, and knowing that I was a rock musician and things like that. And I started a ministry lecturing on the language of music. And lecturing at that time, many people at the time accused me of that and said, "Oh, well, you're just going from one extreme to the other. You were a rock musician, and now you're going to the other extreme." And I was very strongly influenced by a lot of the quotes from Ellen White regarding music, and and I read a lot of books that had to do with which were talking about rock music and all the hidden messages. This was a whole new thing to me. And I kind of lapped that up and included a lot of those things in my ministry. So I became a lecturer in that area. And from that, it developed. I started studying theology. And then I was invited to go speak overseas in Germany, of all places, back there again. And then I was invited to join the ministry, Amazing Discoveries. And from then on, my ministry developed, spread out into more than just dealing with music and worship and the language of music. But I started lecturing on Ellen White. I did a deep dive into Ellen White from the Adventist pioneer perspective, of course, where she came from, what she was about. And of course, I became a very strong supporter. I did lectures at camp meetings and colleges and universities and all over the world. Traveling as an itinerant evangelist, and defended Ellen White. Became a powerful apologist for her. In fact, I would say that even a lot of people who were at the time, and this is probably why now I was able to, see things from the perspective I do now, because I was so deeply into it. I knew the angles. I knew how to defend Ellen White. And a lot of people, whether they were Bible scholars or Adventist leaders, had a hard time arguing with me about the importance of Ellen White and why we should be following her teachings, because I knew from that perspective exactly what it was about. And I, in fact, ended up in a... Sorry, am I going on a little too long?
No, it's fascinating. So you're perfect. I love it.
I ended up in a Adventist institution, sort of halfway, well, not halfway, in the early years of my ministry, a place in Georgia called Wildwood. It was one of the ultra-conservative Adventist institutions where when you go there, it's like stepping back in time to some extent. People dress in the reform dress of Ellen White, and there are a lot of rules and things which I guess most people in ordinary circumstances would find a little strange. So I ended up in that institution, and they have a very particular way of looking at their mission and getting right back to the I would say the probably most conservative approach you can have to Adventism and following the teachings of Ellen White. So with all that in my itinerary in my message, I was able to develop a ministry which defended Ellen White. I left that institution, by the way, because there were things I did not agree with. There were things that I actually did feel were too extreme, but I still felt that Ellen White was essential to Adventism in the sense that you could not have the Adventist message the way that it should be without actually including Ellen White in it. And I know there are a lot of Adventists who think that, well, you know, we are Bible-based. Everything is the Bible and the Bible alone. But so Ellen White doesn't even have to come into it. We can still have the same message. But when you get down to it, there are so many interpretations of Scripture and so many views regarding salvation, and especially when one gets down to the sanctuary doctrine and things like that, that if you interpret the Bible outside of Ellen White, you cannot come to the same conclusion that you would had you not brought Ellen White into the picture. So anyway, I became a strong defender of that message. And then I was in that ministry for about close to 18 years, 17 to 18 years, maybe towards the end of that time when I met Cami. We both had questions. We were looking at things, certain things which we felt were contradictory in the spirit of prophecy. We opened our minds and said, you know, we've got to start researching things and looking at them, and we did, and came to the conclusion that there were so many things that were not actually scriptural. And of course, then there were the contradictions about Ellen White's personal life, even things that were blatant lies and deception, which I bring out in the book, which we just could not live with. And we realized that there was something very badly wrong. And we made the decision, like you did, maybe not for the same reasons, but to take our names off the books of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and to become, one might say, non-denominational. Because, you know, we have this view, and I might mention this, is that we have because I wrote the book, The White Elephant, because that's my experience, the Adventist Church. But I know that there are many churches in Christianity, different denominations, different groups. And there are some of them who, not all of them, some of them are less so than others. But, you know, all churches to some extent have some sort of creed or something that sets them apart from everybody else. And then there are those who really just believe that they are the remnant, they have all the truth, and if you don't follow them, you're going to be lost. You know, that's the more extreme perspective. And so the reason why we remained denominational and still non-denominational and still do to this day is because we realize that there is a problem in Christianity. The Christian message is simple. It's very straightforward. Our salvation is through Jesus Christ. He did not come to this world to establish a denomination. In fact, we are not saved by our denominational affiliation. We are saved through Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone. And I don't have to belong to some particular group who claims to have the truth in order to find my way or find the door to get into heaven. It's through Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone. And so we went to many different churches after leaving the Adventist Church, and we found that in every single church, every single experience, we always found that at some point in time, you come to the point where you kind of have to believe certain things or agree with certain things or kind of fit into that particular bubble that you are in there. Otherwise, you are kind of on the outside. And I don't believe that's how it should be. I believe Christianity is open. The only way is through Christ. And my way of making the world aware of it is through my experience with the Adventist Church, who is one of the churches, unfortunately, that are more extreme in the view that they are the remnant, they have the message, and that you need to, in order to find the truth as God intends it to be, you have to become a part of that church, part of that group, part of that denomination. So that's kind of where we are at right now. With regard to we feel called to share the message, which we do wherever we can on a personal level with people we meet, and but we want to do it from the point of view that when we come to somebody and say, share Christ, we don't want to have to say, well, I belong to this church or that church. We want to bring them to Jesus, and that's what it's about.
You said something earlier about how the gospel is actually quite simple. And I know when I left the church 7.5 years ago now, I noticed I struggled with my sense of self-identity for a while there, which was unexpected. But my identity was so wrapped up within Adventism that to remove that from me meant that I kind of lost a part of who I was, really. So it took about 5 years to kind of rebuild that and get to know myself and who I am. And to do that, I had to, like a lot of people said, so what church are you following now? Where have you gone? And like you, well, don't have to join any other place. But what you said there, that it's actually simple, is true. And it led me to feel inspired to read just the 4 Gospels over and over again, without the Adventist lens, just the 4 Gospels. And I did that for a number of years, and it became very apparent to me that the Gospel is very, very clear, and that the Adventist version of the Gospel and the 3 angels fluttering around in there too, just makes it very confusing. And a lot of people I've been interviewing recently that I'm allowing the more conservative traditional Adventists to have their say as well. Each seems to have a different version of the investigative judgment, the sanctuary, and Adventism, and B, each version is very confusing. So tell us a little bit, before we get into the book, which I really want to do, tell us a little bit about your thoughts when you left on finding your identity once more, realizing that Adventism had been quite a confusing part of your life, and how simple the gospel seemed to you. Did you have a similar kind of journey there when you left? And what year did you leave?
Yes, by what you described, roughly the transition period was from 2010-11 into 2012. It kind of, in fact, no, 2012 would be. I mean, the question started earlier, but when we really left the church entirely, that was about 2014. But the questions began before that, and it was initially confusing. In fact, I can speak for myself. I know that Cami had pretty much a similar experience too, but it was confusing because when you are in something for so long, and especially when you are so deeply into it, and when you've defended it for so long, it is, to some extent, it's almost a heartbreaking experience. Because and it's a painful experience, because it's almost like the carpet's getting ripped out from under you. And you are, like, I think pretty much like you described, you almost feel kind of at a loss, where do I go from here? I know that what I'm dealing with and what I've come to realize about what I believed before, I see that that's wrong, but you need to start putting the pieces of the puzzle back together. And I must say, in my own mind, there were times when I, and I know this from other people's experience too, when they lose that Ellen White Adventist connection and leave the church, they leave religion completely.
Yes.
They just become something else, atheists or whatever they church. And there were times when I questioned, what is this all about? Maybe this is all just a big joke and I should just leave it behind. So I had those 10
Mm.
thoughts, not that I followed through on them, but I had those thoughts, but I had to fight hard to try and find a way. And we did a lot of Bible study and we did a lot of praying as well to get back into the Word of God and to say, you know what, we need to look at this through an entirely different lens. Get Ellen White out of our minds, because once you have Ellen White so deeply ingrained with you, there's almost a subconscious sort of attempt to interpret something from her through her lens. And we had to put that aside and say, no, we're not interpreting things. We have to look at them fresh and new, like babes, reading the Word of God and saying, how does the Word speak to me personally? What message am I receiving? Let the Holy Spirit impress you with those things. I mean, Cami did a deep study into Bible prophecy, the book of Revelation. And of course, the Adventists have a very particular method of interpreting Daniel and Revelation, and which you are no doubt familiar with. And when one takes off that lens, and a lot of course, that is influenced by Ellen White's teachings as well. But when you take that lens off and you start looking at Bible prophecy, you start looking at the gospel, the simplicity of it, without the baggage of the sanctuary doctrine, and being left without an intermediary through the time of probation and all these things. When you take off those lenses and you look at them fresh, the Bible speaks something new to you. And that became refreshing, because the more we absorb that, the more exciting, in fact, more exciting now than ever before, Scripture has become. Bible prophecy, everything else we're looking at in the Bible has become so much more meaningful, because we are not doing it through that lens. We are told to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. If I'm going to continually use somebody else's lens to interpret Scripture without studying the Word myself and seeking for that pearl of great price, through what the Holy Spirit is revealing to me and what God's revealing to me, then I'm always, my vision is always going to be tainted with that person's perspective, with what they are saying about it. And throwing that off was a tremendous experience. And it's scary, but in the end, a tremendous experience.
That's right. Yeah, I agree. We kind of left around the same time. I know my percolating and my slow leaving took 25 years, but the last days were rapid ones, and it was around the Antonio time, which I think was 2014 or 16. I remember my daughter, I'm a late bloomer, and my daughter was only 2 at the time. She just turned 11. And I just remember thinking, oh boy, I've got so many problems with the investigative judgment, the sanctuary, a lot of the doctrines, Ellen White. And this was just the tipping point to realize that she was, if I remained an Adventist, going to be birthed into this institution that treated women as second-class citizens and actively suppressed women. So for me, that was the tipping point. But yeah, around the same time leaving as you. So, look, I'm going to go to a couple of the comments and things in the feed here, but I then want to talk about the book, what motivated you to write it, and I really like your writing style. By the way, it's a page turner, like you say. It's a thick book. Can you hold it up again just to show people
Sure.
what it looks like and how thick it is?
The backside of it.
Yeah,
there we go.
But it's a very easy book to read. Like, it's a real page turner. And what I want to kind of what's that?
If it's not too complicated or whatever, but
No,
I'm glad.
It's not too complicated. You deal with complicated issues, but in a way you break them down in very understandable ways. I think there's another book called Whiteout by one of Dale Ratzlaff's friends, or on their same publishing company, and that also is a really good read. Some people are just good at taking complex thoughts and making them easy for us lay people to understand. So thank you for doing that. But a couple of things I want to tease out from the book. What are some of the newer things, and we'll talk about it in a minute. We'll go to these questions and comments first, but just in the back of your mind, what are some of the key things that you found, you discovered and shared, that are different to perhaps what we've read in the past, from Walter Ray to Ballinger to Ford to currently with Steve Daly and things like that. I'm interested in some of the new material you found, and also I'm interested in your thoughts on the Gospel Adventist who remains an Adventist. They have a more of a Des Ford kind of view of
Right.
Adventism, and they have a love of Ellen White nestled in there as well. I'm
Mhm.
interested in how come that's the case, and whereas the traditional Adventists, they just love Ellen White as high as a
Mhm.
prophet kind of thing. So by
Mhm.
minimizing Ellen White, these Gospel Adventists still have found a way to be quite progressive and liberal in their theology,
Mhm.
not necessarily in their lifestyle, of course. So those two things I'm interested in exploring in a little while. Um, the way the Gospel Adventist incorporates Ellen White, and also some of the new things you discovered as well. So let's have a quick look at some of the comments here before they start taking off. My interview with the other Brian yesterday, Brian Tyler,
Yes.
certainly caused a lot of conversation, and I think we're going to have the same today. We've got GD has said, "Hey, Peter and Brian," giving us a thumbs up. And Dale is watching. Good to have you here, Dale. Has that CD arrived? Let me know. And we've got Angela Lima has given us a hi and a love heart. George Tishi, hey George, you set your alarm, saying interesting. Now this is one we can probably come to a bit later. This is Peter Veach, and he has written, does the Bible share some similar problems to E.G. White in your view? We'll come back to that one. This is a question we may answer a bit later, but famous Amazing Discoveries evangelist is Walter Veith. What is your guest's current relationship with Walter? Maybe have a quick answer of that one now while we've got it up.
Yeah, why not? Me and Walter Fight were very close friends. We were both speakers, of course, for Amazing Discoveries. I have not had any communication since I left the church and came to the United States. I have not communicated with Walter Fight at all. So regarding his current, what currently is happening with him, I can't make any comment on that. All I will say is it goes without saying, because of my own discoveries and the realizations I came to based on Ellen White and Adventism, there would now certainly be many things that we disagreed on, whereas in the past we agreed on practically
Yeah.
everything. So
Yeah.
so yes, unfortunately, there would be things we disagree. How that would play out if we sit together in a room face to face and discuss things, I could only guess. But he's a strong personality and he has very strong opinions. And but I love him as a friend and I love him as a Christian brother. He has his point of view and perspective, no doubt, which he still has. But mine is different, and yeah, from what I gather though is that he's still working with Amazing Discoveries. In fact, I think he's the probably integral part of it, direct or whatever at the moment. That's all I kind of know from having spoken to some of the people who were with Amazing Discoveries before that I've had contact with. But yes, I'm having said that, I'm sure there are some things we would agree on as well.
Yeah.
But as far as the basic Adventist message as it relates to Ellen White, definitely there would be differences, no
Yeah.
doubt.
And we're not even suggesting we have to put him down or anything like that. We're just
But
talking about what you may agree or disagree on. Who started Amazing Discoveries
Amazing
and how long
Discoveries.
ago?
Yes, Amazing Discoveries. I think it started back in the 80s. I was not, of course, around with them at that time. I was in the music industry, but started, I think, in the 80s, mid to late 80s, with the people in Germany. They were the European branch of Amazing Discoveries, the Ziedelbauers. And then Walter became an Seventh Day Adventist, and when he started lecturing, they got to know him, and then invited him to come to Germany, and that's how the German branch of Amazing Discoveries developed. Then after that, their family in Canada, the Gourbets, Wenzel and Dagmar, they got to hear about it and they decided to start the Canadian branch, North American branch, eventually both Canada and North America. And he went over and started traveling there as well, and traveling around the world doing lectures. And so, of course, that's how both the European and the North American amazing discoveries came into being.
Just a quick side question there on Walter. It's Veith, isn't it? Not Veith, Veith.
Well, that's how we say it anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and probably how he says it too. Just an interesting aside there. Matthew Cortman has written and studied and even done some interviews on the show about the Apocrypha, and Ellen White spoke quite positively about it, used it, incorporated it, had visions on it. Some of her visions took wording from the Apocrypha. Walter has recently done a lot of material opposing the Apocrypha and saying, almost that it's a satanic work. Do you recall ever chatting to him about the Apocrypha? Because it's quite clear that Ellen White used it, promoted it, and it was even in her Bible of the day in the middle section. Just an aside, if Matthew's watching.
I never personally spoke to Walter about the Apocrypha, and of course, if he has brought that into his series of lectures and things now recently, I wouldn't even know because I haven't.
No, okay. But I guess
White's use of it, though, I could comment that there are a lot of surprising things that Ellen White used that eventually found their way into her published works, and which she never gave credit for a lot of the time. So I'm not surprised that she did use the Apocrypha, because but it's kind of surprising to me, knowing how he feels about Ellen White, that he would be making those kind of comments about the Apocrypha. Yeah, that's interesting.
And inspired, and I guess this goes to some of the independent traditional Adventist ministries. In spite of clear evidence, they almost seem to drill down and dig down into to holding that view in spite of the clear evidence. But I'd also suggest that the more liberal, progressive gospel Adventist has a tendency of doing that too, that even though there's some really clear evidence of, for example, some of the plagiarism, they drill down in their defense of her. And that's what I alluded to before. Both the traditional Adventists and the gospel Adventists can drill down in support of some of these things in spite of clear evidence to the opposite. Maybe just quickly address that now, why you think that is.
Yes. There's a strange dichotomy in the Adventist church. And I think I don't want to make a judgment, because I know that there are some people who kind of end up defending something which they might not really believe in, because they know that, look, I'm an Adventist, I'm a pastor, for example, I'm a lecturer, I'm a Bible scholar, my paycheck comes from the Adventist church. So either I'm going to go against it and leave the church, or I'm going to stay in the church and find some way to kind of balance the boat, as it were, or keep the status quo, and try and find some reason to still support Ellen White, if there is a possible reason that I could, and somehow kind of take that position. And I'm not saying everybody does. There are some people who definitely stay in just because that's where their paycheck comes from, and lose their job, sort of thing. On the other hand, I think that there are a lot of people who maybe don't know enough, and they don't do their own research and study. And because of that, and in fact, I find this with a lot of Adventists, and subsequent to writing the book, I have found this with some of the pastors and people I've communicated with, is that they will just read some famous Adventist scholar who's writing on the topic and say, oh, that's what George Knight says, or that's what whoever it is saying, and then they kind of regurgitate that same message and accept, thank heavens, I found something that kind of doesn't have to make me really go and look myself and maybe discover some things that I don't want to, and they become happy with just that. And so I do think that it's sometimes ignorance that leads people to kind of be in that sort of situation where they partially support her. I mean, you'll have a lot of the pastors who will, and also another reason why is because there's a lot of flack, especially in this day and age, where people who have been questioning Ellen White and he's started to become very vociferous, especially after Walter Ray's book, The White Lie, where people were getting scared almost to quote her. So now pastors take the position that they will get up in the pulpit, for example, and say, preach a sermon, and instead of quoting Ellen White and making that an authority, they would rather say something in the lines of, "Oh, my favorite author," yes, a statement by my author, or and if they do mention Ellen White, not kind of push it in the sense that she's the authority behind what they're saying. They'd rather include her in a lot of other quotes with other authors who might be concurring, the same point of view. So I think that's another reason why. But I think one of the main reasons across the board is really ignorance. People don't want to sit down and take the time and study and look into the details for themselves.
2 episodes ago, episode 21 of this season, I uploaded the October 27, 1979 Des Ford Forum meeting. And it's for the gospel Adventist. I'm kind of using that term instead of liberal progressive lately. There is a nice kind of gospel presented there that I think is valid, and a lot of Adventists who are scholars, academics, lay people who don't want to hold the traditional Adventist view, instead of leaving, I think they find a lot of comfort in that kind of gospel presented in that 1 hour message. It's like the manifesto for the gospel Adventist. And so I find myself sometimes going, look, I think a lot of people within the Adventist church are just not going to leave. They're not going to process this stuff to the degree. I think people like you and I, who have been marinated generationally within Adventism and leave, are a very rare breed. People sometimes leave if they came into the church quite young or as an adult, but very few people who have generational Adventists will leave. So I'm kind of helping to push this notion that, well, if you don't go along with the traditional view, you're not going to leave. Maybe enhancing this gospel Adventist view might be a healthier way to go for some people.
Yeah. And I know exactly what you're saying. On the other hand, first let me say this, just as a disclaimer, because I don't want to come across as being, kind of hard or rude in any way. But my problem is this: is when you discover the truth about something, when you know how far removed the essential gospel is from that which is the foundation of the Adventist teaching, of the Adventist church, when you understand that you are hard pressed to come to the place where you still remain in that, you either have to make a choice. And by the way, this is not either, because my disclaimer is this, that I love people in the Adventist church. I loved the Adventist faith when I was in the Adventist faith. So I don't only see a problem in Adventism. I see a problem in Christianity as a whole, with all denominations and churches who are pushing their views, who are, a lot of them, getting people into the church. Sometimes it's just because people get brainwashed by the message that they have, and then they stay in that. So you have to come to a point where, if you are in something and you come to the realization that what you are in is not the right way, that you need to make a decision and say, you know what, I might have to leave this, because I think the people, when they stay in that position where they remain in something, it's maybe partly a fear. It's partly a fear that where am I going to go when I leave this? I still love Jesus. I can still be in this church, and I can take a different position, but I can still remain where I am. And it's kind of an uncomfortable status quo sort of position to be in. And so my view is short of saying, if it's not right and you realize that you need to leave that, I think it's something which requires a lot of prayer and a lot of time with God to guide you about what kind of choice you need to make in that sort of situation.
Yeah, I agree. And to anyone that's on the fence and you're watching, I can assure you, and I'm sure you'd agree, Brian, that once you go through the process of rebuilding that identity, and it might take some time, life after that, having left the Adventist Church, is much sweeter. And I can't say that more profoundly, that the sense of liberation, outlook on life in every area it just feels more mentally healthy. Again, no judgment to those staying. This is for me personally, but those on the edge thinking, should I leave? Should I stay? I just want to reassure them that yes, it's fine. You're going to be okay, and you can still hang out with your Adventist friends, as I'm doing. Obviously, you'll find out who your real friends are, and you don't have to. It's not like a death. You don't have to end your connection with good Adventist people. So I just want to encourage those, if you find yourself in a position that you like to leave but you're not too sure, it's not the end of the world if you do. There's some beautiful aspects to leaving that are quite profound.
Yeah, and come to think of it, maybe part of this, and just to bring in another perspective, this is when you are in the Adventist Church, in the type of corner of the Adventist Church where you are really in a very conservative, very fundamental sort of bracket of the church, where your life very often is ruled by a lot of do's and don'ts, lifestyle issues like don't eat meat, don't drink coffee, don't, all those things. There's so many don'ts that things you cannot do. It's very restrictive and very controlling. Now you do it because you know that the prophet has said that this is how we should live. And I think that for someone like me who came out of that, because I became totally vegan. As I told you, I ended up in one of the really conservative Adventist institutions. I left that. It was even too conservative for me. But I mean, when you come out of that and then you find that liberation, you realize that you are set free from a lot of bondage that you were before. But this is the difference. When you have kind of been in the mainstream Adventism, where you've kind of been not part of the real extreme conservatives, but you've been the mainstream, you don't really see or even sometimes comprehend how, when you get to true Adventism, having, to coin the phrase, the real remnant of the remnant, because I'm telling you right now that from the Adventist point of view, if you are going to be a true Adventist, you've got to take the whole package. And the real true, and this was often what now I'm saying it from a different point of view, but when I was giving lectures at camp meetings and to people defending Ellen White at that point in time, I would say, you're an Adventist, right? So what kind of Adventism do you believe in? Let me tell you about the roots of Adventism. Let me tell you about what true Adventism is when you really get down to the bottom line, when the rubber hits the road. This is what Ellen White said. Ellen White said this would happen. We can probably share some of those quotes later. Yes. But Ellen White gave some very, very clear warnings about what would the first step be in giving up your faith. The first step is giving up the testimonies. The next step would finally lead to giving up the scripture, or at least part of the scripture, and finally that leads to open rebellion. So if that's the kind of, where are you in that equation? Are you at the part where you are still, with the testimonies, with Ellen White? Or are you at the part where you are already giving her up? Because if you want to be a true Adventist, and this is where it hurts for the mainstream Adventists, who are the so-called more liberal Adventists, who think you can have your cake and eat it as well, because for them, because if you want to be a true Adventist, then you probably would be at a place like Wildwood. You probably would be there following all the teachings of Ellen White, accepting her interpretations of Bible prophecy and everything else. So now let me tell you about what she says about what you're doing, about what she says about people who drink coffee, and what she says about people who are eating meat. And of course, you know what the statements are. And of course, now I know the contradictions. But the fact of the matter is that is when you're in that mainstream Adventism, you don't actually realize that you are not really an Adventist according to traditional Adventist perspective.
Yeah, yeah, good point.
And then
And what?
to leave. If you see, for me, once I realized it and I saw the contradictions, I realized, man, you are in prison here, you
Yes,
know, so to speak, and I could get out. But for the mainstream Adventist who's living the kind of liberal lifestyle and everything else, who's not really doing the real traditional Adventist things, it's not. Why should I leave? I mean, I'm having a good time here. Everything seems
mm,
to be fine, and we go to church on Sabbath, and we are kind of superficial Adventists when you look at it from the traditional point of view. Sometimes for those, it's even harder to leave.
yes, very true. And it's interesting too that if people come into the church from the outside, or those born into the church,
Mhm.
um, therefore having less choice, they're just kind of born and indoctrinated.
Right.
Adventism is almost like a sales funnel that will always gravitate to the Great Controversy or that institution. What were they called again? That college you mentioned, the
Wildwood.
Wildwood. Yeah, it's almost like the peripheral Adventist, or the hey, I'm having a great time tree hugging one project, everything about Jesus
Mhm.
Adventist, the gospel Adventist is having a
Right.
great time at the edge here, but they are also playing a part in the sales funnel that eventually gets most Adventists to a deeper conservative level, or not most, but lots of people coming into the funnel are going to end up there. So no matter
Mm.
how great your little bubble of Adventism is, you're still aiding in this process of bringing people into the church who are almost guaranteed to have the option, at least, to
Yeah.
go the whole hog. And
Well,
I think into a dangerous part of Adventism, which
that
darkens people's souls and confuses their hearts and minds.
that's true. I mean, I'd use my wife's experience with her family when they were not Adventists when she was a kid. I think around about 8 years old or whatever, they attended a series of lectures given by an Adventist evangelist where they were living, and I don't remember all the details, but I know this much is that when you this is nobody spoke about Ellen White, when you listen to like a Mark Finley or a Doug Batchelor series on television, the hardcore stuff you don't hear about. You hear about the traditional Adventist interpretation of Bible prophecy, and of course, we're going to talk about the Roman Catholic Church and the beasts of Revelation and Daniel and all that stuff. But you do not hear about the hardcore. So you get brought into the church with this message. And then once you're in your local congregation and you are baptized, then you have the little old lady coming to you from the side and saying, "Oh, I'd love to give you this book to read," and slowly but surely,
Mm.
slowly, and also some of the girls, for example, "Oh, you're wearing jewelry. Did you know we should
Mhm.
be wearing jewelry?"
Mm.
They're
Mm.
fresh in the church, and then what do you mean I should? Well, we have a prophet, and then you start hearing about Ellen White, and you start hearing about these. Now, either it's going to put you off, or you're going to leave the church, or otherwise, if you're really serious about, you feel really convinced this is the truth,
Yeah.
you're going to say White, and then you start accepting some of those things. So slowly, you're getting sucked down into that queue.
Mhm.
You start accepting that thing and the
Yeah.
next thing. Next
In
thing
fact,
you go to Wildwood.
yeah,
And
and in fact, you're reminding me of lots of gospel Adventists who are parents spend a lot of their time trying to guard their kids from slipping into these holes and going down the funnel,
that's
because it is a sales funnel for the most conservative elements of Adventism and Ellen White.
I mean, you don't hear about the sanctuary doctrine as a traditional Adventist believe the sanctuary doctrine when you join the church. You
No,
don't. You might hear something about it, yeah, but there's such a watered down,
yeah,
superficial version of that. And it all sounds so wonderful and positive that you're not really getting the picture
no,
from
no,
you find out later on and you realize, man, I never knew that's what that was about.
yeah.
And yeah,
And the gospel Adventist, um, in many ways, has a capsule that if you become one, you are protected from falling into those holes. But
mm,
they spend a lot of time guarding those who join and helping those who grow up into the church from slipping into the other sales funnel.
right.
And you've hit the nail on the head with a lot of the interviews I've done recently with gospel Adventists and traditional Adventists. Both seem to kind of portray the sanctuary, investigative judgment, the perfectionism, I think the gospel Adventists in a more healthy way. But even the apologists are like, no, we feel our assurance, and they water down the message as well. So to come into the Adventist church at the first level, every single person is kind of giving you a nice little view of it. But it's a slippery slope. It's a slippery slope. It's like your rock and roll experience, there's the lights, the stage, the fun, the audience, and the next minute you're doing drugs and hauled off to an institution.
And that's what I would say to Adventists is if you want to, and I know this is, again, it's a challenge really in a way, but if you want to be an Adventist, and if that is where you want to be at, then be an Adventist the way that an Adventist should be an Adventist according to the real beliefs of Adventism. So you want to be the superficial Adventist, that's fine, but bear in mind that if you believe what the Adventist church says about it being the remnant, about it being God's end time church, and that there is no other denomination, it is the apple of God's eye. It is the one that God is going to use to bring the final message to the world. And if you believe in that, first of all, just that scenario, just that teaching would not exist if it wasn't for Ellen White. So if you're going to say, oh yeah, no, we are in the final one, well, who told you that? That was Ellen White who told you that. She's the that this is the remnant. So if you want to be the remnant, then accept the one who was the founder, who's the foundation of Adventism. Accept the teachings, because those teachings, according to the claim of the Adventist church, are based upon the Bible, and the Bible can actually prove them, which I know it doesn't. But the fact of the matter is, if you want to be an Adventist, become a real Adventist.
And I think the gospel Adventists don't even realize that they are actually a different movement.
They are, yeah.
They don't realize, and they so desperately want to be a part of Adventism. But like you say, if you're going to be an Adventist, you got to at some point either say, I'm not embracing that, or I am embracing that. And it's interesting that a lot of the Adventists who would say nothing happened 1844, October 22, you don't have to believe in the investigative judgment, you can put Ellen White in the back seat. A lot of those guys just say that, but I struggle with that. Like when I left, I realized that, like you, we're both doing music, we're up the front, we're sharing the Adventist gospel, not just to the church. I was doing it outside as well.
Sure.
And then when you realize you can't put your name to it anymore, you've got to stop flashing the brand, because the brand is bringing people into a very difficult to balance denomination.
Adventism in the late 1950s, when Barnhouse and them started investigating the Adventist church, and Adventism were kind of put into a corner, and they had to release the book Questions on Doctrine and try to explain why they were not a cult, because they were on the verge of being declared a cult.
Yes.
So that was kind of where I think there was a very sort of a landmark time in Adventism, because before that, Adventists were definitely more inclined to not be scared about proclaiming what they were, not be scared about Ellen White and the prophet that they had and about all their teachings. When it came to that, Adventists said, if we become a cult in the eyes of the rest of the world, this is not going to be good for us. And that is, I believe, the point in time where Adventists started very liberal perspective, and we can still be Adventists. We can still be true Adventists. We can still be the remnant. We can still be God's special apple of his eye and everything else, but we don't have to have all that other stuff. And we're certainly not going to tell the rest of the world about it. If we want them to come into the church, we will give them the watered-down version of who we are. And the Questions on Doctrine, Answers on Questions on Doctrine, was a watered-down version of Adventism.
100%.
It was the real picture.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, and I've been banging on about that through weaving through all my interviews. Questions on Doctrine is ground zero for the current troubles. Sure, 1919 they recognized the possibilities of problems to come. 1888 looked at hang on, have we got the balance of righteous by faith accurate or not? There's plenty of times, but this was the public airing of a deception to the world, saying, this is what we're really like, you've got us all wrong. And even Walter Martin himself, in that 1984 interview with Ankerberg, says, hang on, I'm actually thinking I made a mistake back then. And In fact, just a quick plug for next week, this same time slot, I'll be interviewing Matthew J. Lucio, who runs the podcast Adventist History Project, and he's done about 8 episodes on questions on doctrine, and he and I will be unpacking questions on doctrine exclusively next week. So if you're around, you might like to watch and put some comments in as well. Now, I'm going to just quickly go through some questions, and then we're going to have a 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back and talk exclusively about the book. Rose Power has written, I wonder how many thinking people are driven from the church by its members who do not actually study their Bibles, but have big opinions. The gospel is simple, not complicated, as it is by the church. We'll take that as a comment. Thank you, Rose. I appreciate that you're watching. Love to have you on the show one day and talk about your story. This is an interesting one, and I can concur and agree with this. This is Barry Ford. My experience in the Anglican Church is that there is nothing negative when people leave to go to another church. They are invited up the front with the priest and to give their testimony. And back in the 80s, I was about 1983, I was in a band, and then I had my own band, and then I was in another band called Ezra. So from Jordan to the Peter Dixon Band to Ezra, pretty much from 82 right through to 89, I was playing in all different denominations. And that is one thing I noticed, that you'd sing for the Baptists, and you'd notice the certain audience, and then the Anglicans would come too. And then sometimes people would publicly say, hey, I'm just leaving the Anglicans, I'm joining the Baptists. There was never a problem about it. They had a more genuine, open view of this kind of accepting that, hey, they're just part of the body of Christ, whatever denomination they're in. I can't imagine Adventists doing the same. Now, this is Bronwyn Reed. Hey, Bronwyn, good to have you watching. She has written, by the way, if you're writing from Facebook, please put your name in the comment. Otherwise, it just comes up, as you can see here, Facebook user. But Bronwyn Reed has written, I belong to the Church Universal. God only knows who they are. For me, being part of an SDA network of friends, including ex-SDA members, has given me rich blessings. Ellen White's, and I'll have to read some of this off screen, Ellen White's Desire of Ages is one of those blessings. Her final words as she held up a Bible in the pulpit at Battle Creek Church was, I commend to you this book. I've never seen her as the source of any of my Christian beliefs. She is one of my spiritual mentors.
Yeah, a lot of the Desire of Ages were, of course, thoughts and ideas borrowed from other authors, but that's another story.
Yes,
and those thoughts and ideas, many of them are wonderful, but they were put into the book and taken from other authors.
Yes. In fact, Desire of Ages I'll be doing, let me just check, hopefully in 2 or 3 weeks with Arthur Klim. He and I are going to be doing a couple of interviews on the Fred Veltman 8-year study that the church officially commissioned and paid for, and we're going to go deep into the findings of that. And he just studied only 15 chapters of Ellen G. White. And to be honest, the findings, which I'm sure you've already read and discovered, are quite harrowing, to say the least, even though the church itself came up with a rosy view of it. And so often you read Desire of Ages and you think you're reading Ellen White, but you're actually reading other authors, and then a polished up version by Marion Davis. Right. A lot of Desire of Ages was written here, just 500 meters down the road in her house here in Kurrambong.
Right.
And Marion is a gifted author. I said yesterday, I wish we knew more about Marion Davis, because the way she made, even when she'd copy Edersheim, she didn't even know, I don't think, but Ellen would feed her this stuff. Right. We know now that it was Edersheim, pretty much paraphrased, and Marion would come along and just suddenly it's this beautiful, she was just the most incredible editor.
Right.
Incredible.
Yeah. What presented was pretty hackney, and they sorted it out and made it sound really good.
Yeah, they were exceptional. Fanny Bolton too, I think she had a lot to do with Steps to Christ, and people often talk about those two books as being the beautiful ones, but I would almost put Fanny Bolton and Marion Davis as co-authors on those works.
And that's why Fanny got upset, was because she was not getting credit for the work that she put into Ellen White books. And and even a lot of people, I mean, you probably would have read this in the book, where I clearly showed there was a book written about Ellen White and how wonderful her writing style was. And it wasn't Ellen White. There was somebody else. It was, first of all, the other authors that you borrowed from. And then her words that were put in were fleshed out and made to sound nice by
Yeah.
some of the other editors that were working.
Yeah. I see her as someone there collating all this stuff together, putting in her own ideas, and then going, "Hey, Marion, look, come and you do your work on this." And
Yeah.
I mean, if I had a Marion Davis, I could say, "Hey, look, go through all my interviews and turn it into a book and make it look really good." You know, I'd be lucky. She was a genius. Hey, just
Yeah.
quickly, we'll just keep moving on because we'll go into our break, and then I'm dying to get back to chatting about your book. And you've got your book there. I want you to be reading some stuff from it too, if possible. And Peter Veach has written. Peter Veach is a good friend of mine. He's an atheist. And he is a welcomed member in SDA Q&A, a valued member, and he's got E.G. White, nonsense, not true, Adam, Eve, not a thing, Noah's flood, not literally true, etc. Can you think of any good reason to remain in the SDA church?
Yeah, well, you know, my response is that because if it comes with that sort of bottom line, is would you think of any good reason to be a Christian at all? But yes, I can think of many good reasons to be a Christian, and that would be another topic all on its own. But definitely not a good reason to be a follower of Ellen White or the SDA Church necessarily.
And I think Charles Burrows wrote to something you said a bit earlier. If you want to be one of his, you've got to act like one of his, in regards to, you know, if you're going to be an Adventist. Now we've also got here, thank you, Adrian has reminded me that the Whiteout book was by Dirk Anderson. And I was just saying that you and he have a really great way of writing. I'd love to really help bring your book, The White Elephant, into every home. I think it's a really great read that all Adventists should look at.
Isn't that what they said about the Great Controversy? I'm just
say that again.
Bring it into every home. No, I'm just being facetious.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Well,
it should be in every home.
We'll do the Ted Wilson. I'm going to send out a billion copies to people. Right. Whoa, there's a few forests gone. And even if he does it digitally, a billion great controversies. Like, that's going to create this sales funnel we're talking about. Get on steroids.
The White Elephant, and I wouldn't even care if I got nothing out of it. I think people should really learn about it.
Yeah, I want people to get to know about your book. Now, we're going to have a break. During that break, get some things you can read to us from your book, and also just look through the questions. There's so many. I haven't been able to keep up with them. If you see anything there you want to address, let me know after our break. Everybody, sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to ask you, if I close this app and send a link to you, because Cami sent me that link for the book, is it going to shut this down?
It will shut you down, yeah. So try and you can just open another window, open an email window.
Click it and then come back to this window.
Yes, just don't close this one down, yeah.
Oh, okay. And I can send that to you via Messenger?
If you send it to me via email.
Oh, via email.
Email, yeah.
Actually, your email address, maybe my wife can send it. I don't want to risk dropping.
Yeah, it might be a good idea. It's the Avondale Music one. I think where I sent you the link this morning, I sent.
Because I'm letting her. She's using her phone. I'm using my phone, so I've got it on my phone.
Oh, right. It's avondalemusic@me.com.
avondalemusic@me, all lowercase.
Yes.
avondalemusic@me.com.
Yes. .com. I've given out the address now. I'll be getting lots of messages.
Oh, boy, I'm sorry.
No. I often do. I'm just joking. Joking. So we will be back in 5 minutes. Don't forget to look at the questions, answer any you want to, and then we're going to be back going into the White Elephant book.
Okay.
See you in 5.
You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again. You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway.
Hello and welcome back to SDA Q&A Part 2, second part. My guest today is Brian Newman. And did you have a look at some of the many questions and comments? You're welcome to address any of them before we dive into the book.
Yeah, I didn't actually see my screen for some weird reason. It was not showing them.
Ah, interesting.
I'm not sure why, but it didn't actually show them. It showed that there was a break, but it wasn't actually showing the questions and answers. I mean, the questions.
Yes, what we will do is dig into your book, and then
we can address that.
We can address some of those again a bit later. But yeah, those who have just joined us, those who stayed during the break, thank you. We've got a really healthy sized audience today. And that just shows there's a lot of interest in this topic. So I'm speaking with Brian S. Newman. Go back and watch the first half if you've missed, to find out all about Brian and some of our very interesting conversation we've been having. Hey, I'll just bring up, we do have someone I always like to bring onto the screen who's doing a great work. I'm not sure what that was referring to, but Test the Prophet. Go and find Test the Prophet on YouTube. He has done incredible work into Ellen G. White. Yes, GD has written, Test the Prophet, Adventists are too lazy to read any books, but they will watch the content in video format. That's the key. Okay, interesting. And thank you. Deanne has said, what a beautiful song. I appreciate that. I'll just give that a quick plug if you don't mind, Brian. If people enjoyed that song, you can actually click that QR code and listen to the whole album. That song, if you look on Spotify, if you can't scan the QR code, just look on Spotify, Peter Dixon Band, Standing at the Cross. And you can listen to my work there for free. Or you can support the channel, buy me a hot drink, scan that code. And that actually is a link to my PayPal /Peter Dixon Music, even though I'm doing interviews now more than music. But the donations are greatly appreciated. And, that helps me continue to put together the content, which we do 2 shows a week now. And I really enjoy it. And I think we're creating a valuable resource where Adventists from all walks of life can have a voice, have a valued contribution into the group. And I certainly welcome that. So
I might just say I enjoyed the music too. Really, lovely production as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And you're welcome to listen to the rest of it, of course. I'd love your feedback on the other songs too. Where can people, by the way, get in touch with you? What's the best place? Is it your YouTube channel?
No, I'd say the best place is probably through my email.
Okay.
Which is cruxcreationsproductions@gmail.com.
And I'm just going to check. Good. Cami has sent me the link.
Got it. Great.
So let me just cut and paste that and see if I can. So what was your email again there?
It's all lowercase as one word, as it's spelled, CRUX Creations Productions, Crux Creations Productions @gmail.com.
Email.
Yeah.
Great. So CRUX Creations Productions @gmail. Great. So that's a good way for people to get in touch with you.
Yeah.
And I'm just bringing up onto the screen. This is the link where people can actually buy your book in the Kindle version, isn't it?
Yes,
Correct?
That's right.
I'm interested, those watching, I've just posted that in the comments.
Yes.
Has that gone on to the YouTube comments as well? Those watching, just let me know if it's gone on to the YouTube channel. And Facebook, has it gone onto Facebook? Because I've got a little pop-up window saying it may not go to both. So just let me know. I'll bring it up on the screen there. It's amazon.com /white-elephant-7th-day-Adventism. A few numbers there. if you can't actually click on the link. But I'm hoping people can just click the link and it'll take them there.
Yeah, I'm hoping that.
Yeah. And
If you want to, by the way, people want to get me on Facebook as well. They can communicate via Messenger on Facebook too if they want to.
great. Now, there it is. Great. I've brought that up. I'm just going to see if I can bring that up onto the screen. I think this is now the version that people can see. Sorry. That has the link there. Yes, that's it there. I'm just kind of circling that. That's where you can click and get for only $4.99 the Kindle edition. That is brilliant.
Yeah, it's very cheap with the Kindle.
Yeah, that is so good. I'm just going to see if I can bring that up. Has that in? Oh, hang on. That's got the Great Commission, Christians.
Yeah,
hang on.
Book that one. That's another one.
Is that yours?
No, that's not mine. That's another
not
book.
yours. So that's. Hang on.
I'm not sure why that's popping up there.
Yeah, so that isn't the Kindle version.
But normally, I've found if you do an Amazon search with my White Elephant, it should take you straight to my, to where you could get either the hard copy or the
or the Kindle version. Yeah, I'm just it's not coming. Oh, hang on. Here we go. See all formats and editions. Yeah, look, it's I don't know if it's just the Australian version. It's not giving me the Kindle. So we will explore that though, because I want people to get this book. So we will do some more digging, and I've got an idea that the Australian, but it's taken me to the .com. Anyway, we won't waste time on that. We will find it and post it in the link and also in the Facebook group there. Okay, so tell us a little bit about how you came to write the book. You've left the church, you've gone through all of that kind of big ordeal, the reconstruction, the deconstruction, the rebuilding of faith, the redirecting of your energies. What inspired you to take on this extra responsibility of writing a book?
So I've always been a writer, even when I was doing my evangelism in the church. I wrote books for Amazing Discoveries, which were, of course, pro the position I took at the time. So writing, to me, the desire to want to put down my thoughts, because I had a lot of thoughts as I was going through this change, this process. The desire for me and Cami to want to put down our thoughts was, and she's a writer as well. So it was almost inevitable that at some point in time we were going to start putting down our thoughts and sharing what we were discovering. And also because I had a concern, as did Cami, that there were people who did not know about these things that we were discovering. And just as much as I felt the need to evangelize and share what I believed at the time when I was evangelist with people, I felt the need to want to share the truth about what I was discovering now, albeit from a different perspective. And so the natural progression from there was to put our heads together and start taking all the information that we were getting, and also our own perspectives that we were bringing in, and adding to that as well, and turn that into a book. In fact, Cami came up with the idea of thinking of names of books, and Cami came up with the idea to call the book The White Elephant, which was absolutely ideal, of course, a play on the words, and of course, White Elephant in the room.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it was just a natural progression from where we were coming from.
It's interesting that at every point within Adventism, it comes down to Ellen White, and whether you're questioning her authority or not. And yet people often don't speak of it. Like you said earlier, that people from the pulpit will even say, and now I'm going to read from my favorite author. So this main key person, whether you agree with her authority or you question her authority, is the white elephant in the room, the discussion about her. So can you share some insights from the book itself? Maybe if you could read a couple of things. I found it like every page there was something interesting. And because I borrowed the book from a friend, I didn't want to mark it.
Yeah, we can start from page 1 and then we'll go make our way through. No, I'm kidding. So So yes, in preparation for our interview, I went through the book and chose some things which I thought were valuable that I could share. And sometimes I put things in writing better than I do in words, speaking. But and this is what made me think of this. We were speaking earlier on about why some people have that position they take on Ellen White in the church, and why some of them remain in the church, and why are they perhaps doing what they're doing or not doing with Ellen White. And there was something very interesting that came in the introduction of the book, and I'd like to share this with you, because at the time when my wife and her sons were planning to leave the church, we had a meeting with the pastor. I'm just going to call him Pastor A I don't really want to expose anybody here, by name, but they came to visit us at our house, and this was how the conversation went when they came and met in the kitchen. And this will give some people some insight into actually what is happening in the church itself with regards to how some of the leadership and people actually feel about Ellen White and what they are doing to deal with her. So I share this, and it's on page 25. It's in the introduction part. Cami, her two sons, Pastor A, the youth pastor, and I sat down at the kitchen table, where the discussion very quickly began to center on Ellen White and the spirit of prophecy. Every point that she raised concerning Ellen White, the plagiarism, extreme views that she felt could not be substantiated by scripture, Ellen White's dishonesty in how she obtained information about people in her personal testimony she gave, etc. This is what my wife was sharing with the pastors. All of this was confirmed and agreed upon by Pastor A. So not only did he agree with these views, but he went on to tell us that he was involved in a ministry, which is a ministry called The One Project. I'll say that much about and not share the name of the pastor. But he was involved in this ministry with a group of other like-minded pastors in North America who were actively seeking to change the direction of the SDA church. He so much as stated that he was quite comfortable telling the conference official church that he believed in Ellen White, while in reality, he believed she was a false prophet, and actively seeking to phase her out. That was what they were planning. He's the leader of this One Project, and they were actively seeking to phase her out, at least in the sense of her being seen as a prophet of God. And it seemed that he was quite free of conscience to lie for the sake of obtaining what he believed would be a better, more Christ-centered SDA faith. So there you have a picture. So while you have all these other variations we discussed earlier on, this is one of the things which some people are actively doing within the Adventist church itself. In fact, there was another pastor who came and had a meeting as well, and I didn't particularly highlight this particular one, but that pastor, I don't even remember the details of that. So but again, it's this balance between the faith quoting her as a favorite author, but at the same time, you have the other ones who are actively seeking, even dishonestly, to get her out of the church. And that goes back to that whole thing of, look, if you want to be an Adventist, be a real Adventist. Don't pretend that it's something and try and change this. Why would you want to change an institution? Why would you want to change that when you are completely departing from what the whole existence of this was meant to be in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was very, in fact, that was very disturbing, and more than anything else, that confirmed for us this is time to get out of this institution. And this flies in the face, and I might share this particular quote. This is an Ellen White quote, by the way, which comes from Selected Messages, Volume 1, page 48. And just so for those who are listening, everything that I write in this book is substantiated with the notes and with the sources. Everything is there. This is not just a thumb-sucking book. Mm. Everything, and first-hand material from the authors, from Ellen White directly, from Ellen White Estate. So everything is substantiated. It's not just somebody writing their own ideas. And this quote from Ellen White, where she says, and this is in the face of what those pastors said, the very last deception of Satan will be to make of non-effect the testimony of the Spirit of God, her inspired messages. Another one, she said, there will be a hatred kindled against the testimonies, which is satanic. The workings of Satan will be to unsettle the faith of the churches in them. For this reason, Satan cannot have a clear track to bring in his deception and bind up souls in his delusions if the warnings and reproofs and counsels of the Spirit of God are heeded. So when you read that, that's the original standard for Adventists when it comes to the spirit of prophecy. That's what they believed in the early days. We reject Ellen White. That's where we're heading. And yet this is happening now in the church. And some people might be saying on the one, oh, well, then that's a fulfillment of Ellen White's prophecy. It's coming true. She said it's going to happen. Yes, it is. But it is not necessarily a fulfillment of the prophecy because of her prophecy in that respect, because there is so much more to the picture. And that's what is revealed in the book as we continue in the book. So
it's interesting too that I used yesterday in my discussion with Brian Tyler that the One Project and its counter kind of youth, more conservative group, the Arise movement, Dave Asherik, Ty Gibson, Light Bearers, their little subsidiary Arise, which has really influenced the North New South Wales conference here. And the One Project is well received here as well. But the Arise group, and I'm not criticizing either group, I'm just saying as a systemic support is given to Arise, whereas the One Project kind of got booted off the official platform and they now have to be independent. Whereas Arise given full access, support, funding, and that's an interesting thing that the church plays lip service to the more gospel Adventist, the more liberal progressive Adventist. And I think the leadership could simply resolve this issue if they just publicly said, we accept both kinds of Adventists, but they probably don't because they know where the money's coming from. It's coming all from the independents.
And a lot of it has to do with the money as well.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with that, as it does in so many Christian denominations nowadays. Money speaks very loudly. Yeah. Again, there was a question I wanted to raise, and this was something which Cami and I were chatting about actually last night.
Hi, Cami, by the way. She's probably just off screen there.
You're on the bed in the room, and I'm sitting in the corner.
She's welcome to poke her head in and just give us a wave if she wants.
She's shaking her head. She gets a little. But in fact, I would love her to read something at the very end.
Oh, I'd love it. Yeah.
Well, she's going to be the one to do that.
See how she feels. But you are welcome, Cami. But nice to meet you in the background anyway. Sorry, carry on.
So here's a thought. And the reason why I raise this, because it gives me sort of a departure point to address what I want to. And for me, this is actually the core of what this whole book is about, besides exposing all the things that are contradictory and everything else. But backing up a little bit with regards to generally speaking, churches, all different denominations or groups have some foundational belief or some foundational thing that brought them into existence. It's almost like they build on top of that foundation all the other things that eventually, that they come to study or come to realize. But there is a foundational belief. And you find that in most cases, when that foundational belief, and I'll call it the carpet, when that carpet is ripped out from underneath them, then everything starts to tumble. If you can prove that a foundational belief is wrong, it is the very founding stone, if you like, the cornerstone of that denomination or group. When that crumbles, everything else crumbles with it. And Adventism is no different to this. There is a foundational doctrine. It is what really birthed the Seventh-day Adventist Church. In fact, it was this belief in its infancy before the Adventist Church was ever thought of or came into existence, or even the idea even came about. It was this belief or this thing that inspired Ellen White herself And then from there grew all the other things that came out. The Sabbath came a little later, afterwards. But the foundational belief of Seventh-day Adventism is the sanctuary doctrine.
Yes.
It is, if the sanctuary doctrine is shown to be wrong or defective, and that is not actually based on Scripture, everything else in Adventism caves in. It's not that all their beliefs are wrong. No, I mean the Sabbath. I believe in. There are certain biblical beliefs that they do believe, but I'm talking about that which establishes them as unique among the churches. When that particular doctrine goes, that uniqueness ceases. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So I don't. There are a lot of churches with beliefs that are scriptural and biblical. Doesn't mean that they all disappear, but it does mean that claim which you have in the case of the Adventist Church, which sets you apart and makes you unique, even to the degree that you finally can be the one and only church, because actually it's the sanctuary doctrine, its origins and where it came from, that actually gave birth to the whole idea of the shut door, and that the rest of the world is Babylon, and that God now has a final remnant group. All those beliefs kind of grew on top of this sanctuary doctrine, this sanctuary belief. So so it really all starts with William Miller. It all starts with William Miller. And if allow me, if I can.
Yes, please. While you're finding that, I agree with you. And I think Stephen Beagles has just written, no, it was a match that got the fire burning. But the thing is, if you have to realize that Ellen White claimed God told her that William Miller was accurate in his date setting. Now, there's no way you can misinterpret that. You can only go, well, it seems that you can kind of confirm that that's not true. Therefore, if you come to the conclusion that William Miller was inaccurate in his date setting, but God told Ellen White he was accurate, no matter where you are in the Adventist spectrum, you have to defend or refute that. But it places Ellen White in a position where if she's gone from it and just becomes an inspirational person or an inspiring person, you are removing her authority, and you are admitting that she lied or was deluded.
Right. Because I mean, if it is God who said it, and that is the authority behind what is being said, then you are essentially rejecting God then, because God was the one who confirmed that it was correct. So by providing, of course, that God was the one who said was correct, and there's clear scriptural evidence and clear evidence from the history of all of this that, and this is my belief, that God was not the one who said that. When she got that, and it's kind of a difficult thing to accuse somebody outrightly of being a liar. I don't want to. People can be deceived, and people can have false visions, and people can have all these things and actually believe their own lies. But in this case, it was very difficult for me to come to the conclusion that Ellen White did not know that she was actually telling untruths. And in fact, the evidence is clear in the book that she definitely did tell untruths about many different things.
That she knew. So it wasn't just that she was deluded. She was using that information manipulatively. And
it was probably
I want you to unpack a bit of that if you can when you get to that time. But back to William Miller.
Oh, well,
just before you read that too.
Sure.
Where is it? I can't find it now, but Michael C, I think, is suggesting that we're not producing any new material. I assure you, Michael, if you do read the book, you'll find lots of things there you probably haven't thought about before. And even just let's say that nothing is new in the White Elephant book. Let's just say that nothing's new. Every new generation needs a new, fresh take on this topic. Otherwise, we'd be left with having to refer back to Ballinger and Canwright. We need every generation needs reminders in fresh new ways by fresh new people. But I think you will find, Michael, unless it's a conversation I'm diving into that you're having with Tess the Prophet, I think you'll find there is a lot of new material in there. Okay, back to William Miller.
Yes, I mean, I'm just to mention something about that. That's one of the things which a lot of people told me when they read or only heard portions of the book. Oh, well, there's nothing new in this. Look, the criticisms against Ellen White went back to her day, and a lot of the arguments are arguments that have been presented over and over again. And then, of course, the church has had its comeback, and people have tried to, create the idea that, well, this is wrong, and we've got an explanation for everything. The fact of the matter is that, yes, many of the things that are presented in the book, The White Elephant, are ones that have been presented before, which I felt were not adequately addressed. And then I have added new perspectives and things that are not there. So even though some of the things have been spoken of before and addressed by some authors, there will be things that you will discover and hear that are not actually being addressed or have been addressed. And of course, then there are new things that have not at all been addressed, before either. So
I agree. And having read the whole book, I can confirm that. But Michael's got this thing going on about this sort of stuff should be free. And you're copying from others, and do I need to pay for it? Michael, that reminds me of a time when I moved to New Zealand. I was offering free vegetarian meals to the locals because I wanted to kind of have them gather around, and I told them it's a Bible study, but you're going to get free vegetarian food. And anyway, after a few months, I had to say to them, "Look, do you mind maybe giving me $1 or so? Because I've got no money to buy more new food." And so sometimes you do need compensation to be able to keep doing what you do. So, Michael, no one's making that claim that everyone has to be for free.
If somebody can't, and I've done this many times on my Facebook, if somebody can't afford a book and they really just need the copy, I'm happy to send them a copy of the book via email. I can send them a PDF of the book. So it's not like I'm desperately trying to make money out of the book, because I'm not. Yeah,
exactly.
It's the message for me that is the most important thing.
Yep. And so, Michael, go to cruxproductions@gmail.com and request. You might even get yourself your own copy there.
Yeah, you can email me quite happily. There's no problem. Okay, so here was the thing that happened with William Miller. You see, William Miller struggled a lot with the whole idea of the 2,300-day prophecy, especially when he read Daniel, and because Daniel speaks about the daily, and he had a difficult time trying to find out exactly what the day, because all the theologians previously associated the daily with the daily sacrifice of the temple, and many of them wrote about it, and they believed that that's what the daily was. And you cannot separate the 2,300-day prophecy of Daniel chapter 8 from the idea of the daily. And so William Miller was struggling with this whole idea about how do I actually, because if the sacrifice is done away with and the daily is done away with, then this is going to lead me to at the time that Christ was crucified. And that's where the daily is going to end. And that doesn't fit in with the 2,300-day prophecy if you start with where the 2,300-day prophecy was to begin. So anyway, he finally came to the conclusion that the daily was paganism, based on what Paul wrote in the book of 2 Thessalonians about that which would be revealed. And he finally decided that paganism was really what it was talking about, and that would lead to 1844. Of course, he came up with the dates. There were 3 different dates that were set, and that finally brought him to 1844, and the final date that was set, October 22, and that was when he believed that this paganism he associated with the papacy, and that this would then be revealed, and it would be the beginning of the end, or that Christ would return, and then the end would come, and the world would come to an end. So the problem with that is early in the early 1900s, the brethren got together because a lot of them did not agree with the paganism idea of the the end of the 2,300 days was not paganism, because they believed it had to do with the sanctuary being cleansed after 2,300 days, and had to do with the sacrifice, with the daily sacrifice. But the contradiction or the problem that arose in that was that if you do that, you don't have really an end date for it, because the 2,300 days is associated with the daily sacrifice. So I'm trying to find, there's a spot here in the book where I actually write this down, and I put it in such a way that really
just while you're finding that, just want
Yes,
to address. I just want to address Michael C again.
yes.
He's got hang on, where's it gone? So I have to buy the whole book to get your truth. No, we just said you can have it for free. And he's then said, Peter, shame on you. Michael, you crack me up. Yeah, where's the shame? You've just been offered a free version of the book. So write to Brian and receive, and you will find lots of interesting material there.
Okay. So the problem with the sanctuary doctrine is this, and that is the one aspect. But the other aspect of the sanctuary doctrine, which I would like to really get into right here, is, and it's in the title, in the chapter where I write, that's entitled, Where is it? Where do you find the sanctuary doctrine in Scripture? And there is two things that happened, in fact, more than two, but two important things that I believe that happened is that one of the declarations that William Miller started bringing into his sermons was that the bridegroom was coming. And of course, one of the favorite texts he used was Christ's text in Matthew 24, where Christ is speaking about the 10 virgins, and that they were not prepared for the coming of the bridegroom. And of course, we're familiar with that story if you know the Bible, what the Bible says about that. And that became like the watch message. Behold, the bridegroom is coming. The world is coming to an end. And the problem with that is when it did not happen in 1844, what Ellen White did was she took that whole message, which clearly, from what Christ said when he used that in Matthew 24, it was clearly in relationship to the second coming. That's what he was talking about. When I return, there are some that are going to be ready. There are some that are not going to be ready. But the deception that arose after 1844 was that Ellen White started using that very same text that he was using and applying it to this whole new message of the cleansing of the sanctuary. Christ had now passed over from the holy to the most holy in the sanctuary. Another idea which did not originate with Ellen White, actually originated with Hiram Edson, who then saw this vision, or that Christ had passed from the sanctuary, from the holy to the most holy, and then all the brethren felt very relieved, because now we actually have an answer to the reason why Christ didn't appear, and now we can all be happy and satisfied that we know exactly what happened. Something nobody saw, something nobody experienced, but something happened in heaven, and we are now able to say that we found the answer to our problem. Ellen White, of course, received a vision in 1845, a little bit later, and then she expounded on everything that Edison said. But the problem was, and this is what I bring out in this chapter of the book, is you can't use a scripture that clearly is talking about the second coming of Christ after the fact, when this thing didn't happen, and now make it apply to something that you claim happened in heaven that nobody knows, because it wasn't the second coming. Christ was referring to the second coming in this. The other problem as well.
True.
The other problem as well that arises out of this is that, and I'm trying to find this particular statement in the book here. I'm also having trouble with my glasses here.
That's fine. That's fine.
Anyway, the other problem is that Ellen White resorted to this idea that she needed to find a way of explaining why there was a disappointment. and this is what I want to share with you. Here's the quote. She said that God actually designed that his people should meet with a disappointment. Okay, I want to pause there for a moment, because what she is actually saying is this whole great disappointment that happened because God planned it to be so. In fact, she goes on to say, the time passed, and those who had looked with joyful expectation for their Savior were sad and disheartened, while those who had not loved the appearing of Jesus, which didn't happen, of course, but embraced the message through fear, were pleased that he did not come at the time of expectation. Their profession had not affected the heart and purified the life. The passing of time was well calculated to reveal such hearts. So the bottom line was that God planned this. I really want to call it a deception, because that's what it was. What it was, he planned to disappoint everybody so that he could sift out the people who really wanted to see him from those who did not want to see him. Not only that, she goes on to describe that there were angels. These are the angels who are speaking to the hearts and minds of the people before the great disappointment happened. She describes this. She says, I heard the voices of angels crying, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go he out to meet him. So now this was the message of William Miller. Go out to meet the bridegroom, he's coming. And the angels were actually there together with God, who was planning this, and they were telling the people, the bridegroom's coming, go out to meet him. And of course, then she goes on to speak about the other churches who were criticizing them. And one of the things that the other churches were saying, the people who did not believe in William Miller's message, was they were saying, you're setting a date for the second coming of Christ. And you're saying it's going to happen on a very specific date, the day, the time. It's going to happen in 1844, October 22. This is when Jesus is going to return. You're setting a date for something, and the Bible says that we do not know the day or the hour. Now, in spite of that criticism being true, I mean, put yourself in the situation where you were at that time, and you were hearing this message that God is coming, and you're a Christian belonging perhaps to some other denomination, the Methodist Church or whatever church it might be, and somebody's going around saying this is when it's going to happen, and you're hearing that. I mean, the first thing, if you're a pastor or a Bible-believing Christian, and many of the spiritual leaders of that time, the pastors in the churches, they were criticizing William Miller and saying, you can't say that. Nobody knows when Christ is actually going to come, and you're setting a date for it. The Bible says no. Now, Ellen White turns this whole thing around and says, oh, you had hard hearts, and you actually didn't want to accept the fact that something really was happening, and God was actually the one who was testing you. So, there are a number of times where Ellen White actually puts the blame for failed prophecies on God and says he was the one, either by testing or doing something, and that's because this thing didn't happen. But so that's one of the first problems that you have when you look at the explanation given by Ellen White of what didn't happen in the Great Disappointment of October 22, 1844. The other problem arises with what I mentioned earlier, was that if you don't have an end date anymore, and if you do away with the very teaching that William Miller used to confirm his end date, the paganism, because if you have the daily, you've got to go back to the time that Jesus was crucified. When you do away with that, you don't even really have an end date after all anyway. So this was a big problem. But not only was that a problem, was straight after that, Ellen White then started saying that everybody else who did not accept this message, the other churches, were Babylon. So all the fallen denominational churches became Babylon, and the door of mercy was now shut, and only the brethren who would accept this message, the ones who were still stayed with the message, or those who would accept it, were the ones who could be saved, and that Jesus was about to return. And of course, I mean, we are now 150 years later down the line, more than that, and this has not occurred. But she went around preaching in Maine and traveling around preaching the message that Jesus was about to return. And there are so many experiences, and I share that particular experience in the book where she was traveling with a speaker, Israel Damon, who was one of the original speakers of the William Miller Message, and where they literally preached to the churches that the God was going to return. And if you're not baptized right now, and they baptize people right there and then, if you're not baptized now, you will not actually be saved, and you're going to be lost. So the problem with the sanctuary doctrine is Ellen White took it to the point where and here's another very interesting part, which a lot of people do not refer to. She took it to the point where she actually started telling people, and I want to read this quote because it's a very powerful quote, that she used in connection with the fallen denominational churches at that time, and what actually happened in the heavenly sanctuary when Christ passed from the holy to the most holy. And I'm going to start here at this portion here. She says, I saw distinctly and clearly that instead of our high priest coming out of the most holy of the heavenly sanctuary to come to this earth, i.e. the second coming, on the 10th day of the 7th month at the end of the 2,300 days, he for the first time that day entered the second apartment of the sanctuary, the most holy place, and that he had a work to perform in the most holy place before coming to earth. And then she goes on to say, I turned to look at the company who was still bowed before the throne in the holy, the first apartment. They did not know that Christ had left it. Satan appeared to be by the throne, trying to carry on the work of God. I saw them look up at the throne and pray, Father, give us thy spirit. Satan would then breathe upon them an unholy influence. In it there was light and much power, but no sweet love, joy, and peace. Satan's object was to keep them deceived and to draw back and deceive God's children. Now, this was all connected with the whole thing of the churches becoming Babylon, and that they now were focused on the holy instead of the most holy, where Christ had now come in to perform his special, the special new phase of his ministry. So the problem that arises out of this is that, and the question that I would ask is one that I pose in the book itself, is that what were the church's belief? The other churches, the other denominations, the other spiritual leaders of that time, what was their belief? Did they believe that Christ was in the holy or the most holy? What did the Bible teach regarding Christ's ministry? Was he in the holy or the most holy? Of course, if we read what Paul says about Christ in the book of Hebrews, and that he had moved into the most holy, and that's where he was after his resurrection, then we will know where he was. He had been there for the past 2,000 years almost already. And all the leading Bible scholars of that time were always directing people's attention to Jesus in the most holy. So this whole idea that the churches were even focused, whether it was literally or whether it was just in what they believed that he was in the holy, is not even true. The churches, God's people already post Christ's resurrection and ascension to heaven, were already focused on Christ's work in the most holy. The Bible confirms it. The book of Hebrews confirms it. Paul clearly states Jesus' work, that he had passed through the veil, and he was now ministering in the most holy. And now suddenly in 1844, we have this new belief that Jesus had now moved. He had all the time only been, and for the very first time, he had now moved from the holy into the most holy. There is so much ample scriptural evidence and historical evidence from what the Christian churches believe that Christ was in the most holy. So the churches were not focused on Jesus in the holy. They were focused on Jesus in the most holy. And he was performing his ministry there since his ascension to heaven.
Yeah, look, there's so much evidence clearly in the Bible against that whole view of the sanctuary being accurate, the Adventist version being accurate. I often find that some of the apologists that are from the the gospel Adventist side, like using mental gymnastics to kind of make it make sense. It's like fitting square pegs into round holes.
Mm-hmm.
I do quite like Stephen Beagle's approach, where he just goes, well, if Ellen White said that, then she's wrong. And he has a website called Gospel Adventist. So he's a proponent of finding that gospel within Adventism and staying within Adventism. But he's honest enough to say, no, if she's wrong, she's wrong.
And you've got to go from there. If you're going to take that position and you remain in the church, you have to go from there and actually clearly state then she is a false prophet.
That's right.
There can be no other conclusion. You can't be half a true prophet and half a false prophet. You either are a prophet of God or you are not. And there are some very clear biblical tests for a prophet, and they are not the physical signs that a person has when they're in vision. There are some clear biblical tests as to whether someone is a prophet of God. And if you are not speaking according to what the word of God has already revealed, then how can you really be a prophet of God? So
that's right. Yeah.
Church and say, well, she was wrong. But then you have to follow that up by saying, well, if she was wrong, and if something so profound and so important, like a sanctuary doctrine, something which affects the very salvation of people is wrong, then the person's got to be a false prophet.
See, Stephen Beagles has just written, he sees her, and he's, who I just mentioned, has the Gospel Adventist website. He sees her as inspirational, but not inspired. How can, and Steve, I'm asking this to you as well, and interested in Brian's thoughts. So in my interview I did with Bill Johnson, I think it's episode 1, season 2, I asked him if you could be an Adventist even if you didn't believe anything happened October 22, 1844. And he said, yeah, I believe so. But to me, if you believe in, so if you don't believe in 1844, October 22, you've come to that conclusion probably because you think Ellen White was mistaken. If you then say Ellen White was mistaken, you can only conclude she's mistaken based on the evidence of the Bible and the dates.
Right.
Then you have to go, okay, she was mistaken, but she said that came to her from God. Mm-hmm. So if she is just an inspirational person, not inspired, and you're concluding she's not inspired, but she claims to be inspired, surely that decimates the whole idea of her being a prophet of any kind, or even a messenger, if that message was wrong.
Right. You see, and of course you hit the nail on the head with that. And the fact is, because once you've reached you come to those conclusions, you have to come to the thing which as I said earlier, I try to avoid, but it's so difficult is that she's actually a liar. And there is just no way that you can escape that, because if you have so many different things that you have taught, that you've claimed have come from God, that are supposedly biblical, and even the very foundational teaching that began your whole ministry is false, surely there's some point in your ministry where you have to look in the mirror and say, I'm telling lies. And I cannot conclude anything else other than she did lie.
She lied, yeah. Angela Lima has written, false as they come. Ellen, dearest, continues to deceive. Mm-hmm. And Jimmy James has written, we are to turn from false prophets. So if you've concluded that Ellen White didn't receive the messages from God directly as she claimed, if you're a Gospel Adventist and you've concluded that she didn't and she was just inspirational, you have to conclude that she either lied or was deluded in the receiving of that message, or the message came from another source.
I think maybe originally there was a delusion involved, and I'm not denying that she might have received visions, but there are people who go have states of trance and see things and experience things which can be deceptive and which they might interpret as being a true vision. But there comes a point where you start using that and starting to take information from other places and building something out of it. And there comes a point where you have to say, well, the vision I'm having, is it really true? You've got to ask yourself some questions. And there must have been a point somewhere in her experience, I don't know where it was, where she came to the point where she realized this is going good for me. People are listening to me and I'm going to go with it. And then you start lying and telling fake stories. And yes, and what about the fact of then starting to plagiarize people? If you're plagiarizing people and not giving credit for that, I mean, there's got to be some point in your experience where you I mean, I don't know why she didn't reach that point, because it seemed like she were you so that you are defending yourself over and over so much, making other people look bad to make yourself good, that I don't even know how you could really live with yourself. But it seemed to me that she could carry that through right till the very bitter end.
Yeah.
I mean, to case in point, and I know I'd love to. I want to share this because this confirms the fact that there were absolute lies that were being perpetrated. And in the chapter, which is entitled "A Trunk Full of Contradictions," I share a number of things besides the fact that I deal with the whole amalgamation claims that she made about man and beast being amalgamated in detail. And of course, another one, which I might just make a little bit of an allusion to before I get to the meat here. Excuse the pun, because the meat is what we get to. So, but
the plant-based meat.
Yeah. Where she says, and I'm just going to read this quote. She experienced, this is her in heaven, looking at what was in heaven, the beauty of the nature and everything else. She described it. She says, as they witnessed, well, first of all, she speaks about Adam and Eve. And she speaks about when sin came in and what happened to them in their experience. She says, as Adam and Eve, as they witnessed the drooping flower and falling leaf, the first signs of decay, Adam and his companion mourned more deeply than men now mourn over their dead. The death of the frail, delicate flowers was indeed a cause for sorrow. But when the goodly trees cast off their leaves, the scene brought vividly to mind the stern fact that death is the portion of every living thing. She goes on to describe what she saw in heaven. Now, this is the perfect environment that we will be one day in heaven. She says, I saw another field full of all kinds of flowers. As I plucked them, I cried out, they will never fade. Next, I saw a field of tall grass, most glorious. Behold, it was living green and had a reflection of silver and gold as it waved proudly to the glory of the King Jesus. Now, the problem here is this. These are one of the things that actually defy the natural process that is in nature. And in the book, I do a whole study on this, because the natural process in nature that was built into nature at creation was that nature would sustain itself. And it is very clear, even, I mean, when God said, let the earth bring forth the herb yielding seed and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its own kind, whose seed is in itself, what did he mean? Where do the seeds come from? Seeds are part of the process of the leaves turning brown, the seed falling to the ground, or the flower releasing the seeds, and then a new plant grows, and something. Whether it's like God planted these plastic trees in nature, and they just stayed that way. And when Adam and Eve picked a peach off the tree and ate it, and they threw the pip on the ground, which is actually the seed, by the way, that just lay on the ground. Or did that seed, that pip that was thrown on the ground, decay and go through the process of giving birth to another tree that would grow? And there's an interesting article which I actually used in my book as well about the whole question of what is death. Death is what man and animal experience. You know, the animals and human beings. We die. We lose our breath is released, and we then and we become ash, and we die and dust. But it is not the same in the Hebrew. When you read the word that is used for death, when it comes to man and beast, it's the same word that is used. But the word that is used when we speak about the death of a plant or flowers is not the same word that is used, because death was not associated with plants and flowers. It was part of the natural process of nature. When we go to heaven one day, based on even Jesus speaks about the whole concept of death when he speaks about let me just share this with you. Jesus himself spoke of the natural cycle of seed-bearing plants in John, when he said, verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. For the fruit to grow, the wheat has to die. The seed has to fall on the ground and the seed has to then grow again. And that is what is part of nature. To look at death in nature, if you want to call it for want of a better word, death or decay in nature as being an equivalent of the same thing that happens to man and beast, and that Adam and Eve looked at this and they were absolutely appalled, more so than we grieve over somebody who has died, is completely untrue. Because nature functions in a very particular and specific way, and God built that into nature. So, okay, that was the first point. It was on a slide before I got to the whole meat thing. And the thing I want to share that deals with the question of the lie, as it were, is Ellen White's statements. And probably the best way for me to share this is to actually share what she herself had to say about the eating of meat and what she told people not to do. So, in 1863, Ellen White receives her first health vision, and this is what she had to say after she received this vision. But since the Lord presented to me in June 1863 the subject of meat eating in relation to health, I have left the use of meat. For a while, it was rather difficult, and she goes on to explain that, but she says, I have lived for nearly 1 year without meat. Now, this is after that vision. Then she goes on to say regarding, because that's when the health reform message began, and meat, vegetarianism became an important part of that. In 1867, then she goes on to say, the health reform I was shown is a part of the third angel's message and is just as closely connected with it as the arm and hand with the human body. It's the right arm of the gospel, as she says in other places. So immediately the whole Adventist message from this point in time became inextricably connected to the health reform message, which then, of course, developed into all those issues of not drinking coffee, not drinking tea, tobacco, alcohol. And of course, some of these things are, of course, not good for us. But that became a part of the whole Adventist message. And then she goes on to write now, in 1868, 1 year later, she writes, yes, she's writing to a family about what they're putting on their table. And she says, you place on your table butter, eggs, and meat, and your children partake of them. They are fed with the very things that will excite their animal passions. And then you come to a meeting and ask God to bless and save your children. How high do your prayers go? Now, you will remember, of course, for Adventists who have read this a lot, the whole idea of animal passions connected with the eating of meat. Ellen White brings this up over and over again. It is interesting that in the whole system of the Jewish system, the ceremonial system that they had, the sacrifices, the very priests themselves ate meat on a daily basis. Now, you might say, well, they drained the blood out of the meat or they cooked the blood out of the meat and that was okay. But the fact of the matter is that the Jewish people, part of their diet was meat. They ate it in their festivals. At the Passover, you killed the Passover lamb and you ate meat. In fact, I would dare to say that Christ himself, when he was on this earth and celebrated the Passover during his life on earth, probably ate the lamb as well. In fact, even after his resurrection, he ate meat because he ate the fish. So to talk about, I mean, those priests must have been filled with animal passions all the time in the temple. They're eating meat every single day of their lives. It was part of the diet. Ellen White tries to present the idea when she speaks about the quail that was sent from heaven, and the Christ did not punish them for eating the quail because they were eating meat. They were being punished because of the attitude and the lust and the greed that they were displaying, and that is what the problem was. It was not the fact that they were eating meat. God gave them meat, and also because they did not accept that God had sent them the manna from heaven, but they were not satisfied with what he had sent them. The problem was not the fact that they ate the meat. But yes, she had this message to give to this poor family who were feeding their children. All they were feeding them was butter, eggs, and meat. And their prayers were not reaching heaven anymore. Now, I'm pressing this point home because of the strong language she used, because I'm going to share the rest of what actually happens after this. She says, and yeah, in 1870, a few years later, she makes it, and I do this chronologically in the book. where you have statements she made in the beginning, and then you have statements she makes later on as you go down the line, and then you look at what her own practice was. So in 1870, she writes, those who digress occasionally to gratify the taste in eating fattened turkey or other flesh meats pervert their appetites and are not the ones to judge the benefits of the system of health reform. They are controlled by taste, not by principle. So when you're in this boat, you're not controlled by the right motives. You're controlled by your tastes. Now comes the interesting part. And there are one or two other stronger statements she said, because she even said that ministers who ate meat were not fit to stand in the pulpit and preach. Now, that's pretty strong language. If you can say that a minister who is not fit to preach the gospel message because he eats meat, how much more applicable would that message be to a prophet who is receiving visions from God? Dare you stand up and claim or a message from God in the pulpit while you yourself are eating meat?
Exactly.
If you've told other people that they're not fit, that when you've told the family prayers are not even heaven. So here we go.
Yeah. And yet she continued to preach, even when she returned to eating meat.
Okay, so here we go. Here is a testimony by this was at the 1999 Bible Conference, Daniels. This was an important conference, 1990 General Conference that they had, where they spoke about the gift of prophecy and everything else. The General Conference president of the SDA Church, a longtime friend of White, testified that in 1871, so this is a year after this message I read previously, Ellen White, while down in Texas, were eating meat every day. And he says, when we were down in Texas and old brother White was breaking down, Sister White just got the most beautiful venison every day to eat. And my wife would cook it and would sit down and say, oh, Ellen, that is just the thing. She never did hold him up and make him live on a diet of starch. I mean, referring to James White. She gave him meat. Her husband, who was also a minister, of course, of the gospel. Then in 1878, here's something even more telling. And I quote again, Christmas morning, we all took breakfast together. James Cornell, Florence and Clara, their two girls, brother and sister were, and their three children, sister Barla and Etta, a girl living with them, and Sister Daniels, our cook. She's, by the way, this is Ellen White writing. She's saying what they did at Christmas. And father and myself, the James White, in other words, and myself, we had a quarter of venison cooked and stuffing. It was tender as a chicken, and we all enjoyed it very much. There is plenty of venison in the market. 1871, same year as well. This is the same year where she's writing this to her family about what they did at Christmas. She writes, the Apostle Paul exhorts the church, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Men then can make their bodies unholy by sinful indulgence. If unholy, they are unfitted to be spiritual worshippers and are not worthy of heaven. If man will cherish the light God in his mercy has given upon health reform, he may be sanctified through the truth and fitted for immortality. But if he disregards that light and lives in violation of the natural law, he must pay the penalty.
Wow.
How about that? I mean, it is almost mind-boggling, and this is where I wonder where the dichotomy in a person's mind actually happens, where you can declare to people that they are unfit to even be saved, and then go and eat the very thing that you have commanded people not to eat.
See, that's hypocritical.
It is, and that's why I say it. I said that there comes a point where you have to call a spade a spade. It's a lie, and it can only be a lie.
And not meaning to spoil the flow, keep going. I'm enjoying what you're saying, but I'm just reminded of when James was alive. I wonder how Adventism would have looked if he hadn't have died quite early on, really, in many ways. And they used to travel all over the place. She'd get up and he'd kind of do a talk, and she'd do her mesmerizing thing, and people would come in the droves, but they were selling these little pamphlets all the time. And again, they had to pay for their travel and all sorts of stuff. But I get the impression when I read a lot of that early stuff where he was involved with the publishing and the newsletters and the pamphlets and whatever, that he was quite an astute businessman. Fine, great, go for it. But that they were going, hang on a second, there's probably a little bit of dollars in this hustle, which may have she may have come up with some mesmerizing visions just at the right time, just to increase those funds,
The intake. Well, judging by all the things that I've read and judging by things like this, that is absolutely not inconceivable. At the same time, while she was talking and warning people about this, that they would be lost, and she again, right? And I just want to add that every single thing I'm sharing here is in official sources.
Yeah.
And sourced in my book. So this is not something I'm reading with no sources. Everything is 100% sourced.
Yeah, you're doing what Ellen White should have done.
Yeah. Brother Glover, he speaks. They were getting short of provisions. They were traveling, and then they went out, and a young man from Nova Scotia had come from hunting, and they had a quarter of a deer. And she speaks about the duck that Willie shot, and they had duck, and by the way, duck. Wasn't that one of the meats, the birds with the webbed feet, that according to unclean meat?
It's even worse than just eating fish. It's an unclean meat that she was devouring.
And then they were eating that. And again, that is absolutely sourced. And then, there are so many of these statements where she was actually feeding people like, your father and I have dropped milk, butter, sugar, and meat entirely at this point in time. We came to California. We are far clearer in mind and far better in body. We live very plainly. We cannot write unless we do. We live simply. Your father bought meat once for May while she was sick, but not a penny have we expended on meat since. Now, she went through these phases where she actually stopped eating meat for a while, and maybe there was a prick of conscience, and of course, then she went back to eating it again. Because then later on in 1896, she's warning again again went through one of these phases where she was warning about meat. But then strangely enough, she writes here to Mary in Oakland, Mary Kelsey White, which is, and she writes to her sister, and she says, Mary, if you can get me a good box of herrings, fresh ones, please do so. These last ones that Willie got are bitter and old. If you can buy cans, say half a dozen or so, of good tomatoes, please do so. We shall need them. And if you can get a few cans of good oysters, get them as well. Now again, they'll be getting to the whole. Oysters are considered unclean food according to what
100%. Yeah.
And there was another story, of course, when they were going to Australia, where Fanny Bolton saw her in a restaurant behind one of the screens in the restaurant devouring oysters, and then of course she told people about it, and Ellen White entirely condemned her and whatever else. But yeah, you have Ellen White in her own words actually saying, "Get me some oysters." So we could go on, and there are a number of quotes with regards to these things that happen, but there are so many of these contradictions which you find, and there is no way of getting around it because it is from official Adventist records. These records are in the Ellen White estate. You can get these records. They are sourced in the book, and this is literally what happened. And the question that would arise out of this is, can you actually really, with a clear conscience and with a clear mind, as somebody who believes in the ministry of Ellen White, say, well, you know what, I can still believe in Ellen White. I mean, you might have heard of the book, which was entitled Prophets Are Human. I think it was an Australian author, I forgot the name. Bradford?
Yes, Bradford. Graham Bradford.
Yeah. Prophets are human. Indeed, they are. And many of them did things which all human beings do. But when you have continued a ministry, and we talked about now what I quoted out of the book, is a span of decades and decades of ministry where you are literally telling people that you are in danger of losing your eternal salvation if you do this, and then you are doing it at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's a completely different story.
I'm just interested, while we've got Stephen Beagles here, who who does put Ellen into perspective. How do you answer that, Stephen? Where she's saying to people, you cannot even preach on the platform if you're eating meat, and yet she is eating. Yeah, and people will often say, well, she was flawed, and that. Yeah, well, don't make the claim then that others who do it shouldn't speak. If you're a flawed individual struggling with meat eating yourself when you claim you shouldn't be
honest.
Fine, be flawed, be human, but don't say to other people, you must not speak on the platform.
Yeah.
And
that, look, let's face it, the statements regarding tea, coffee, and meat, which he categorizes in the same statement,
yeah,
that it becomes a question of salvation from her point of view. You cannot lay that burden on other people when you take the liberty yourself of actually the statements. It's not just like, boy, we failed, we made a mistake, we had meat yesterday, and I'm so sorry. It was like we really enjoyed it. It was such it was as tender as chicken. It was so great. Yeah. I mean, this is a completely different category of failing, if you would like to call it one word. Yeah. So you cannot have, like we said earlier on, you are either a prophet of God and you are presenting the gospel in the way that it should be presented, or you are not. Because one of the things that clearly the Christ himself, the Bible clearly states, that's going to keep you out of heaven is if you are a deceiver. Now, you want to tell me the meat's going to keep you out of heaven, but I tell you what, if you're a deceiver, that's going to keep you out of heaven.
Exactly. Yeah. George Tichy has just written, oh my goodness, this elephant is huge. We've got Michael C. chirping away in the background saying he wants something new, but I don't know if you can see the comments, but he's just trolling at this stage. And Michael C., does the C stand for cognitive dissonance? Cognitive dissonance? Hey, I'd love you on the show. I've invited you in the comments. Come on and share about your faith of Ellen White. You mentioned that you didn't want to because you see yourself as just a lay person. They're the lay people. Like, I'm just a lay person. We're the ones that we need to be sharing our views and thoughts. I think your view, Michael, would be very valuable. So let's tee up an interview next week, unless you're a little bit too scared and vegan chicken. Stephen Beagles has written, sorry, you're going to say something there?
What I was going to say, and I was going to say this to the gentleman you're talking to, is, this is an interview, and obviously you cannot cover everything that he's covered in a whole book. Exactly. And I told you, read The White Elephant, see where the sources are taken, where the statements are taken from. Look at the sources. There is much more. The same old, we've heard it before. The problem is, you've heard it before, but you never actually really listened. You need the book. You need to look at the information and study it. Because I'm telling you now, if you can walk away from that and say, I still feel the same way, then, I would be highly surprised.
And I think you've invited Michael Cognitive Dissonance a free PDF of it in the email. So don't say shame on anybody, Michael. Just send away, you'll get a free one. But I hope people go and buy one as well, because you've got to put food on the table. William DeCamp has said, Peter, why in the world are you asking Steve Beagles? I'm asking him because he is remaining in the church and is somehow working with Ellen White, still being a reliable witness. That's why I'm asking him. And Stephen has said, well, there were deeper problems involved in her rebuked and not just health. Not sure if that's answering. And William DeCamp, I'd love you on the show as well. I'd love to hear your story. And he has written back in reply to that. William DeCamp said, Beagles, nothing she wrote was from God, period. You're hilarious.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I must say this because I know we're probably nearing the end of the interview, but I'd like to say this, is that while one is exposing that which is wrong, error, call it a lie, call it whatever you want, I always, in my heart of hearts, I know that there are many people out there who are struggling, people who need to find the truth, but at the same time who need to realize that there is also a when one reveals something which is not pleasant that for people to hear. You always have to temper that with the idea that there is a better way. God is calling you to a better way. There is a solution. If you feel that this is very difficult to deal with, and you don't know what you are going to do because of what you're hearing, that there is a better way. You've had to go through it. Cammie and me have had to go through it, and that there is a path that we can take, that God will lead us on, that will lead us to where He wants us to be, and that path is going to lead you to the simplicity of the gospel. It does not have to be complicated. There is a freedom. And, James writes that the law of God is a law of liberty. It is a law of liberty, not because it binds you and it puts stumbling blocks in your way. It is a law of liberty because it sets you free from the bondage of sin. And that can be found in Jesus Christ. And that is where I hope that sharing something like this, hard as it may be to hear sometimes, will lead you to discovering that simple truth that will lead you to the foot of the cross, will lead you to Jesus, and will expose to you a Christianity that is far more vibrant, far more free than you ever thought possible.
And I think, and I shouldn't even really address it because Michael's just trolling in the comments, but Michael and others, if you eventually address these issues which haven't been addressed and talk about them, you will come to a greater understanding of them. It's not about presenting material and going, oh, that's a new one, or that's a new one, or I've heard that before. The Adventist Church and the Adventist apologists do not address these things, and we will keep raising them time and time again until they do. So that's why I'm saying, Michael, come on the show and address some of these thoughts. Yes. Address the fact that Fanny Bolton was asked to go and get mussels, which is an unclean meat. Let's talk about that. You want new material. If you've heard that before, Michael, well, address it. Stop putting your head in the sand. Explain why that's morally a good thing to do, to get your secretary to get your unclean meat when you tell pastors they can't preach from the pulpit if they're not vegetarian.
I mean, how sad would it be that if I went to a sermon and I heard a portion of scripture quoted over and over again in different sermons, and I said, I've heard that before, so it's old hat. The fact of the matter is some things need to be repeated, even if you have heard them before, because sometimes when you hear something again,
100%.
Things are opened up. Your mind gets, here's something different. Say, well, you have a different perspective.
100%.
And that's, you read a different book, you might get a perspective which you never had before. And the same happens with everything that we repeat. You get different perspectives. Read the book and you'll find something new.
Yeah. Michael has just, and I'll bring it up on the screen, he's just said, what issues? That's not true. All these have been they may have been commented on, but they've not been addressed. And in fact, I've never heard any Adventist apologists talk about the mussels and Fanny Bolton. The only thing I've heard someone say is, "Oh, Fanny made that up."
That it wasn't made up. And you read the quote, but I don't know why it's not.
And she wrote to her sister, didn't she? And yeah.
It's old, but if it's such old hat and you still haven't come to the realization that she was false, then the problem is not with her because she's dead and gone. The problem is you, because you've heard this old hat and it's the truth, but you don't want to accept it. You still want to support the prophet.
Yeah.
The truth.
So Michael, come on the program. I won't even make it difficult for you. Just come and share your explanations and reasons why. For example, Ellen White said, don't preach from the pulpit if you're eating meat, and yet she continued to preach from the pulpit even though she was eating unclean meat. So just come on the program. Michael says we're changing the subject. You're classic, Michael. Anyway, we're going to ignore your comments for a little while because it's getting us off track. And someone else, Adventist Analyzer, has just said, you're just repeating yourself, Michael. I'll just bring up another one. I can't find it back on the thread, but I paused it on my comment here. Derek McCutcheon has said, remember we were talking about how people could, they use editors to make stuff sound good. Right. Better, and he was saying AI can collate all your material from all your past interviews, Peter, and edit to make it sound amazing. That would be awesome. But I'm guessing you would only do that if you allowed developers to be co-owners of your podcast, because he's kind of saying that, Ellen White used Marion Davis, and I said she should have been given more credit. So therefore, if I used AI to do a great job, I should give them more credit. Why is there so much interest in Ellen G. White having an editor? AI comes up with brilliant stuff, but it's not its own thoughts. There's so much interest in Ellen White having an editor because, my sister-in-law is actually really well-known author, and she has an editor, but she's not claiming that she doesn't.
Right.
The reason this continues to have interest is because Ellen White claimed that, what's that famous passage that she wrote or James wrote, or not one thing is coming from
Yes,
outside
exactly.
sources, and and Derek, Derek, I appreciate your work there, and maybe you can get the AI. I don't know how to use AI properly, so maybe you can do it. I'll pay you 10% or an editor's fee if you like, and we'll put your name on it. Bigger writing than mine. And Derek, I'd love you on the show as well, because I feel some people like yourself feel that I kind of betrayed the church by leaving, and so I read between the lines some of the casual disappointment that you reflect in your comments. Come on the show and let's talk about that stuff. I would love it, because I value you, and I still remember and think highly of you from Avondale College days. So come on the show as well. Explore these thoughts more.
Some of the old friends that you knew before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And people I still really like and get on with. Angela has just get all of Peter's interviews and write a book. I'll when I work out AI, I might do that. William DeCamp, this is a compliment. I must bring it up. Great interview, SDA Q&A. Thank you. And William, I would love you on the show. I like your passion and your blunt openness. So yeah. Sorry, Brian. This often happens. This often happens. We get sidetracked, but it's a conversation, so it's all good.
By the way, this quote might ring a bell, and it's probably not the exact quote, but this is the one where Ellen White actually makes the statement. She's indicating the infallible authority behind her ministry. Ellen White declares, "I gave myself, my whole being, to God to obey his call in everything. And since that time, my life has been spent in giving the message with my pen, her writings, and in speaking before large congregations. It is not I who controls my words and actions at such times."
Interesting. Well, read that again. Read that again. That's powerful.
She says, I'll read this particular part. She says, "I gave myself, my whole being, to God to obey his call in everything. And since that time, my life has been spent in giving the message with my pen and in speaking before large congregations. It is not I who controls my words and actions at such times."
Yeah.
Yet, in face of what we've shared here, it's very hard to kind of put those two things together.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Hey, look, give us one more thing from the book. I like when you're reading some excerpts from the book, and see if you can think of something that Michael C. has never heard before. And Michael, I was the one making that claim. Brian's not made that claim. I was the one said that I read the book and I came across new things in the book. So Michael, you're banging on about crazy stuff there. I made the claim, not Brian.
Oh.
but I found some new stuff there, and I'm not someone that hasn't looked at this material before. So
there will be always there will be plenty people have heard, but there will be those things that they have not heard before. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, exactly.
For each person, be something different.
Yeah.
It's not going to be for everybody. Each person's going to say, "I never heard that one before," but you might have heard the other. It's going to be different for everyone.
Exactly. And sometimes you said some things that I had heard before, but it was just a refreshing reminder. I mentioned that October 27, 1979 talk, the Spectrum interview that Des did, and I put it up. It's episode 21, season 6. I listened to that at least 10 times in preparing to put it up, just for people to listen to as a one-stop place instead of me finding the link every time someone asked for it. I spent at least 10 hours editing it, as in cleaning up the sound and this kind of thing. I kept finding new stuff in there, even though I'd heard it all before. So, like you said earlier, sometimes you hear the same thing, but it's a new perspective, or you read it again and you go, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
Oh, look, let's just quickly bring this up. Michael publicly has accepted coming on the show, but no free for all, he says. He doesn't want me to talk about veggie chickens out of the conversation. That's awesome, Michael. How can I get in touch with you? Shoot me a message somehow. You know my email address now.
Well, let me know when he's on.
Yes, I will. You can write in the comments. Oh, that's good. And Stephen Beagles has said review is good. I agree.
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah. Tell us, read us something more. We'll have one more thing from the book. And hey, I would love to have you back on the program down the track if you wouldn't mind. And
Sure, and I love communication with you anyway, so that would be great.
Exactly. Yeah. And don't forget, just one more time, just read out your email list if people want to get in touch with you. Your email address, I should say. If you could just read out your address one more time, just so people know how to get in touch with you.
All lowercase, Crux Creations Productions, all one long word, CRUX. So Crux Creations Productions, as it is spelled, at gmail.com.
Great.
Yeah, I have got one thing I'd like to share. It's actually part of the closing of the book, because this really like to emphasize this, and then I'm going to get Cami to read that.
Oh yes, awesome. Yeah.
So let me read this. This is what Cami wrote, by the way, and I'm quoting Cami here because she wrote this whole last part of the book. And this is what she said: "Get your Bible and study God's word as you have never studied it before. The passages you have always looked at a certain way because it was what you have been taught, but not necessarily because it is clear in the scripture. Look at those things with an open mind and prayerfully ask God to unveil his true meaning to you. You will be surprised how much God will reveal strictly. Let me just put my. You will be surprised what God will reveal strictly from his word that you never saw before. Things that used to be obscure and difficult to explain will become more and more simple and understandable as you let God's word interpret itself instead of someone else having to interpret it for you. This is what we, Brian and me and our boys, have been doing, and it has been an exciting adventure to realize that there is more to everything than we ever understood or believed than we ever conceived. Don't be discouraged. Don't allow superstition, because there's a lot of superstition when it comes to Ellen White. People are terrified of rejecting Ellen White because of what she said. But anyway, I'll just make that as an aside. Don't be discouraged. Don't allow superstition to cause you to fear trusting in the Bible and the Holy Spirit to give you clarity and interpretation. I say superstition because there have been warnings made from Ellen White's writings that if a person rejects her, they will eventually reject the Bible as well. And this will cause people to be afraid of giving the Bible full ability to interpret itself without some other authority. The Catholics use the priests, the Mormons use Joseph Smith, Islam uses Muhammad, and Adventists use Ellen White. There are thousands of people who have chosen to give up their belief in Ellen White and trust the Bible alone, and have only grown stronger in their faith and not in any way given up their relationship with God and his word. Sometimes we have to start at the beginning again. A quote is brought to mind that I read from Oswald Chambers in a book called My Uttermost for His Highest, where he says, "Let the attitude of the life be a continual going out in dependence upon God, and your life will have an infallible charm about it, which is a satisfaction to Jesus." You have to learn to go out of convictions, out of creeds, out of experiences, until so far as your faith is concerned, there is nothing between yourself and God. 2 Peter 1 verse 3 and 4 tells us that his divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness through our knowledge of him who called us by his glory and goodness. Through these he has given us his very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature and escape the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. Resist the temptation of pride, stubbornness. It is a difficult thing to come to a juncture after a lifetime of dedication, loyalty, and perhaps work in a specific church and then to make changes. It might be a temptation to feel that it is too much to ask, to admit that there are still things that God has not revealed to you, or that perhaps you are even wrong in some of your understanding and that he would actually ask you to go in a different direction. It is not for you to question why God chooses the times he does to reveal things. Even if you are in the last leg of your life, you must be willing to follow Jesus wherever he leads and give up whatever you must give up for him. If any man come to me and hate not his father, his mother, his wife, children, brothers and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Luke 14 verse 26.
Yeah. And that, did you say that was put together by your wife?
Yes, that was Cami who wrote that.
Yeah. Rose Power has just written, hang on, where is it? Oh, thank you, Angela. She's great interview, Peter. Thank you. And Rose Power just wrote, your wife's wisdom is uplifting.
Amen.
Yeah. And was that the bit that you were hoping she would read, or that's...
But it's actually a poem, and it's a beautiful poem.
Yeah.
The roads that God leads us down. But she doesn't want to get... Cami, are you going to get in front of this?
No, I'm just going to do it.
Oh, she doesn't want to do it.
Hey, we can hear your voice though, Cami. Nice to meet you.
Got a
Nice
good
to
voice.
meet you too.
And thanks so much for what that Brian just read out there too.
Oh, sure. These are very complicated issues, but I think that if we just pray and ask God to show us his truth, he will. James says that he does it without finding fault. If we ask for wisdom, he'll give it to us. So I just want to share this poem by Robert Frost called The Road Not Taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry, I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference.
Thank you, Cami. Yeah, wow, thank you. Moto Sapien has just written, that's a great quote and summary by your wife. I regard the writings of Ellen G. White and agree with Cami's, just checking spelling. It's with a K, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Advice to look deeper and look for yourself to know the truth.
Amen. Mm-hmm.
And Mark Anthony has written Amen as well. And so thank you, Cami. Appreciate that very much.
You're welcome.
Next time, be great to have you on the program as well, and both of you can tag team a bit. Yeah, because I in reading the book, I did write down some notes, and I thought another time I'd love to just ask you some specific questions about some of the things that you discovered as well there.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Oh no, I purposely didn't today because I thought I just wanted to let it flow today without me kind of steering it, which I'm really glad I did because it's just been a fantastic conversation. Any closing thoughts for us?
Yes. Well, what Cami read for me is a great close, but I would just say that I concur, of course, with what she said. And again, I can't emphasize more that if you discover that something is not the truth, that is, in fact, that is the bottom line. Jesus came to this world to lead people to truth. He didn't come to lead them into a greater deception, into some. The Jewish faith during that day and age was complicated enough already as it was, with the extra additional writings, the Talmud, and everything else that they had. And Jesus came very specifically to simplify faith, to simplify the practice. If your religion and your faith is complicated and it is not as simple as Jesus was trying to make it, and it is as simple as Jesus, the person that he is, that's how simple it is. If your faith is not that simple, then there's something wrong with the truth that you believe. Find the truth. Jesus wants you to have the truth. And if something is not true, reject it immediately, outright, and say, you know what? I'm going to take the road, the one that's less traveled.
Yes.
And because not many people want to go down that road.
No, can be lonely.
Because that's the road that's going to lead you to eternity and to salvation, not some complicated thing. You're not going to have to live through a time of trouble without a mediator and all these things. You don't have to worry about an investigative judgment where God right now, because you're in the Adventist church, is actually starting with you and judging you. No, there's no such teaching in the Bible. You don't have to worry about Jesus not doing his ministry in the Holy of Holies, in the sanctuary. That has nothing to do with investigating people the way that is described. Find the truth about these things, grab the truth, and you will find simplicity, and you will find Jesus in the process.
Yeah, well said. And one last plug for your book, The White Elephant. I'm just going to bring it up on the screen. And I'd love if you and I and Cami can pursue finding that link for me. This is the because I'll get that as well. So this is the Amazon link there. It's also in the comments, and it's easy to find anyway. Just type in Brian Newman, The White Elephant, and that will come up on Amazon. And I just really encourage people to go ahead and buy this book, and you will be greatly edified, and your wisdom will be increased, and you'll be able to have lots of interesting discussions. After all, that's kind of what it's about, really, is just getting these things discussed. Sorry, what was that?
Access that link and I'll get it to you as soon as possible.
I don't know why it's listing Kindle, but anyone,
Kindle,
but anyone who goes to Brian's Facebook, anyone can go to his Facebook or his email and request the book, and he will send them a PDF copy. Anyone can do that.
Thank you,
Perfect.
guys. That's awesome.
Just to make sure, I'm not into the money. I once on Facebook post when I was having debates with people about the white elephant further back.
Yeah.
And some guy, somebody I know well, but he said to me, "Oh, you're just promoting this because you want to sell books and you want to make." And I want to make it clear. I made it clear then too. I said, I'm not interested in the money at all.
Yeah. Someone said that to me about doing these programs, and I said, "You're welcome to look into my bank account. I will happily, come over, show you." It's not a money spinner, but it does help having some financial contribution, because it does help a little bit putting food on the table. And being able to continue offering resources and other things as well. But yeah, I concur. You and I are not into this for the money, and anyone can easily discover that. There's empirical data that proves it.
Yeah.
Hey, look, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you, Cami, as well. There's some really nice comments there. And very much look forward to chatting to you again. So until next time, we will say farewell, and
thanks, Peter.
See you again soon.
And absolutely, God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.